Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I've always been someone who enjoys the peace of nature. There's something about being in the wilderness, away from everything, that lets me disconnect and recharge. That's why I decided to go on a solo camping trip a few months ago. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, 3 days in the woods, a little backpacking, and a lot of quiet time by the fire. I thought it would be the perfect way to clear my head. The first day was peaceful enough. I set up my camp by a small creek, a quiet spot that felt untouched. I spent the afternoon hiking around the area, gathering firewood, and just taking in the fresh air. It was exactly what I needed. As the sun began to set, I cooked my dinner and settled by the fire. The sky was clear, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. I felt safe. Alone, but content. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something in the distance. It was faint at first, so I brushed it off as the wind or an animal moving through the trees. But then I heard it again. A whistle. Soft and distant. It was only 3 notes, and it repeated every few minutes. The same 3 notes over and over. It was an eerie sound, but I didn't think too much of it. It could have been someone else camping nearby, or maybe an animal making a strange noise. I tried to shake it off and focus on falling asleep, but the sound persisted. It was getting under my skin, though I couldn't explain why. Something about it just felt wrong. There was a rhythm to it, but it wasn't natural. I lay awake for what felt like hours, straining to hear the whistle each time it came. Every few minutes, the 3 notes would cut through the stillness of the night, and each time it did, my stomach would tighten. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I was just imagining things. I'd gotten a little too worked up over nothing, I thought. The day was bright and clear, and I spent it hiking through the trails, enjoying the solitude. It wasn't until the second night that the whistling returned. It was exactly the same, 3 notes over and over, repeating in the same pattern as before. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was probably just someone else on the trail. After all, I wasn't the only one out there. But when it happened the third night, I was no longer sure. By this time, I was beginning to feel the weight of being alone out there. The whistling didn't stop. It wasn't like a human whistle that might come from a person walking by. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. The same 3 notes, as though whoever or whatever was making the sound knew exactly what they were doing. I began to wonder if it was some kind of signal. Was it someone trying to communicate? Was it meant for me? My mind raced with possibilities, and none of them were comforting. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Each time the whistle came, it seemed closer. I started thinking about the layout of the area around me, how the trees were thick, how the creek was at the bottom of a little ravine, and how I hadn't seen anyone all day. I realized there was no way it could be another camper who was close enough to make that sound without me hearing them earlier. I was starting to panic. I wanted to pack up and leave, but the thought of walking through the dark woods with no clear sense of what was going on terrified me. By the 4th night, I had enough. I decided that I wasn't going to wait around to find out what was making the sound, so I packed up my tent and all my gear and hiked out of the area. It was still dark, but the whistling had stopped, at least for the time being. My heart was pounding as I made my way toward the trailhead, and I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station. I went straight to the desk and spoke to one of the rangers who was on duty. I must have looked pretty shaken up because he gave me a curious look and asked if I was all right. I've been camping out in the backcountry for a few days, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And I kept hearing this whistling every night. It was the same 3 notes over and over. It sounded really close, but I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I'm not sure what it was. The ranger's expression didn't change. He looked at me for a moment, and then he just nodded. That's happened before, he said. Several people have reported hearing the same thing, especially around that area. The whistling, the same 3 notes, always in the middle of the night. It's been going on for years, actually. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Years? I repeated, my voice cracking. You mean other people have heard it too? What is it? The ranger didn't have an immediate answer. He just gave me a small, almost sad smile, like he'd seen it all before. We don't know, he said, looking down at some paperwork. We've had a few incidents of people getting spooked by the sound, but we don't have any clear explanation for it. Some people say it's just an animal. Others think it's something else, but nobody's been able to figure it out. I stood there for a few moments, too stunned to speak. It was like he had just confirmed everything I had been thinking, but it didn't make me feel any better. I didn't know if I should be relieved that I wasn't imagining it, or scared that this was something that had been happening for so long with no real answers. I've never heard anything like it before, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Is it dangerous? The ranger looked up at me and shrugged. We've never had any reports of anyone getting hurt because of it. But it sure does unsettle people. We tell hikers to stay aware and report anything strange, but that's about all we can do. I didn't ask any more questions. I felt sick to my stomach, but I was glad to be out of the woods. I didn't want to stay in the area any longer. I went straight to my car and drove back home. I'm still not sure why I heard those nights, but the whistling haunts me. Every time I close my eyes, I can hear those same 3 notes in my head. I'll never forget how it sounded, and I'll never forget how it made me feel like I wasn't alone out there, even though I couldn't see anyone. Now, every time I go camping or hiking, I'm a little more aware of the sounds around me. I don't think I'll ever forget that eerie whistle. And I can't stop wondering if maybe, one day, I'll hear it again. I had been hiking for a couple of days, deep in the park, alone, just trying to get away from everything. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, a bit of solitude to clear my mind. I hadn't seen many other hikers, just a few people here and there, and it felt nice to be off the beaten path for once. I was in a remote section of the park, somewhere not too far from the main trails, but far enough to feel like I was on my own. It was the 3rd day when it happened, and I was heading down a narrow trail that cut through the woods. The sun was starting to dip low, casting everything in this orange glow. I was feeling good, enjoying the quiet, when I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably just another hiker, right? But then I heard them get closer, and I turned around to see a man standing there. He was wearing a ranger uniform, the green pants, the shirt with the park's logo, and the ranger hat. He was tall, about my height, and had a clean, serious face. He didn't look out of place at all, but something about the way he stood there, just watching me, felt off. I don't know why, but the first thing I noticed was how still he was. Like he was waiting for me to speak first. I said, "Hey, there." He didn't respond right away. He just nodded and then said, "You need to be careful. There have been reports of bears in this area. Stay alert." It wasn't anything I hadn't heard before. There were often warnings about wildlife in the park, especially bears. I've hiked here enough to know to keep my distance from them. I nodded, half paying attention, and said something like, "Yeah, thanks for the heads up." The ranger then took a step closer, his eyes locking on mine, and he said, "Be sure to keep your food packed away. Don't leave anything out at night. Bears are attracted to the smell of food. If you're careful, you'll be fine." It was a bit more intense than the usual warnings, but I didn't think too much about it. People have their way of giving advice, especially park rangers. I thanked him and started walking again, hearing the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. I looked back after a few steps and saw that he was still standing there, watching me. It struck me as strange, but I just kept walking. The sun was going down fast now, and I was getting close to the spot where I'd set up camp the night before. As I walked, my mind wandered. I thought about what the ranger had said about bears. I'd heard about bear sightings in the park before, but it didn't feel like a big deal. I had my bear spray with me, and I always kept my food in a bear canister. Nothing to worry about. I reached my campsite shortly after and spent the rest of the evening setting up my tent, cooking a simple dinner, and enjoying the quiet. It was a clear night, and the stars above were so bright that it felt like I could reach out and touch them. For a while, I forgot about everything, the stress from work, the mess I'd left behind, all of it. But as I sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the image of the ranger. It wasn't just that he'd warned me about the bears, but the way he stood there, watching me as I walked away. It was like he was waiting for something, like he knew more than he was telling me. I told myself I was overthinking it. I was out here alone, in the woods. Of course, my mind was going to wander. The next day, I decided to take a different route, heading deeper into the forest. I hiked for a while, and by midday, I'd completely forgotten about the ranger encounter. That was, until I ran into a small group of other hikers near the trailhead. We stopped and chatted for a bit. It wasn't much, just small talk about the weather and the trail conditions. One of the hikers mentioned seeing a bear earlier that morning, and I told them about the ranger's warning. "Yeah, I just spoke with him yesterday," I said. "He was out there giving me the whole spiel about bears and food safety. Really serious about it." The other hikers looked at me like I had two heads. One of them, a woman in her mid-30s, laughed nervously. "That's funny," she said. "We didn't see any rangers out here today." "You sure it was a ranger?" I frowned. "Yeah, I'm sure. He was wearing the uniform, the whole thing." "What, you don't think he was one?" She shrugged, but the guy next to her spoke up. "There's no ranger working this trail. Not right now, anyway. They're all stationed over by the main areas for the summer rush. You didn't see anyone else, did you?" I wasn't sure what to make of that. It didn't sit right with me. I remember the uniform, the way he talked, everything about him seemed like a ranger, except now, according to these hikers, he wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't bring it up again, but felt something cold creeping into my stomach. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I had just imagined it. But it didn't make sense. I decided to swing by the ranger station when I got back to camp. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, but I had to ask. That evening, after packing up and hiking back, I went to the ranger station near the main entrance to the park. I approached the front desk and told the ranger on duty about my encounter earlier in the week. I mentioned the man in the uniform, the warning about the bears, and how he'd seemed a little off. The ranger behind the desk didn't say anything at first. Then he looked at me, his brow furrowed. "You're sure about the description? You're sure he looked like a park ranger?" "Yeah," I said. He was in full uniform, khaki pants, the green shirt, the hat. Everything. The ranger behind the desk looked down at his computer and typed something in. He glanced back at me, then at his screen, then back at me again. "There's no record of anyone matching the description working in this park," he said slowly. "Not right now, anyway. All our seasonal rangers are assigned to the main areas." "You're positive he was a ranger?" I nodded, now feeling a little unsettled. "He gave me specific advice about bears and keeping food locked up." "I'm telling you, he was a ranger." The ranger at the desk shook his head, almost like he was trying to figure out if I was lying. I didn't know why I'd make it up, but at that point, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "I'll make a note of it," he said, still looking at his screen. "But I've been here a while, and I can tell you for sure no one by that description is working right now. Not in this area. You should be careful out there, though. If you're ever unsure, make sure you call in. We're always around." I left the station feeling colder than when I entered. The whole thing was starting to feel like a bad dream, a dream where I had no control. I couldn't figure out what had happened, but it didn't sit right. I'd met a ranger, or at least someone who looked like one. But now, no one else had seen him. It was like I was the only one who had encountered him. I don't know what it means. I don't know if I'll ever know. But that man in the uniform, he wasn't supposed to be there. I'm sure of it. And I can't shake the feeling that I was being watched the whole time. I was driving back from my brother's place late at night. It was a long stretch of highway, barely any cars passing by. Just darkness and the occasional glow of gas stations in the distance. My phone was playing music through the speakers, but I kept the volume low. I don't like driving at night, not because I'm scared of the dark, but because the quiet gets to me. I had been on the road for about an hour when I saw him. A man standing by the shoulder, waving one arm in the air. His other arm was bent, holding something close to his chest. His car, an old, beat-up sedan, was parked behind him with the hood open. The emergency lights flashed, reflecting off the wet pavement. I wasn't the type to stop for people. I've heard stories. But I saw his face when I got closer. He looked young, maybe in his 20s. No jacket, even though the night was cold. His expression was tight, desperate. So, I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder a little ahead of him and put my hazards on. Kept the engine running. I looked in the mirror as he jogged toward my car. His shoes slapped against the asphalt. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't look threatening either. I lowered the window just a bit. "What's wrong?" He breathed hard, like he had been running. "My car died. Won't start. My phone's dead too. Can you call someone?" His voice shook, but I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. I nodded and grabbed my phone. "Tow truck or someone you know?" He opened his mouth. Hesitated. Then, just as he stepped closer, I saw something. Behind him. The bushes off the side of the road, barely visible in the dark. Something moved. A shape. A person. I tensed. The guy must have seen my expression change, because he turned fast. And then it all happened at once. The man in the bushes came forward, quick, stepping out into the light. He was taller, broader, wearing dark clothes. His hands were empty, but something about the way he moved made my stomach drop. The first guy, the one I had stopped for, he didn't run. Didn't yell. He just stood there. Like he was waiting. Like he knew. My skin went cold. I hit the lock button on my door. The second man took another step, eyes locked on me. The first man, he didn't turn back to me. He was watching the other guy. I didn't think. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. The tires spun for a split second before catching, and then I was moving back onto the highway. My hands clenched the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I looked in the mirror. The first guy was still standing by my car. The second man was walking toward him. Then, the first guy turned, and he ran. Full sprint. Not after me. Away. Into the dark. The second man didn't chase him. He just stood there, staring after him. Then he turned his head, just slightly, toward my car. I drove faster. I don't know what I almost got caught in. I don't know if the first guy was part of it or if he was the one running for his life. But I didn't stop again. Not that night. Not ever. I was in my apartment, sitting on the couch with the TV on, not really watching, just letting the noise fill the space. It was around 8 p.m., already dark outside. I had my dinner on the coffee table, a half-eaten plate of pasta, and my phone beside me. Then I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps against the door. I live alone. No one ever comes unannounced. My friends always text first, and I hadn't ordered anything. For a second, I thought maybe I misheard, that maybe it was someone knocking on a neighbor's door. But then it came again, 3 firm knocks. I muted the TV and stood up. My apartment isn't big, just a 1-bedroom, and the front door is only a few steps from the couch. I hesitated before going closer, looking through the peephole. A man stood there. He was tall, dressed in a gray jumpsuit, like a maintenance uniform. Dark hair, clean-shaven. He had a neutral expression, but something about the way he stood, too still, too upright, made my stomach clench. I didn't open the door. I just called through it, yes. He answered right away. I'm with maintenance. We're checking the plumbing in the units. Need to come in for a minute. I didn't request any maintenance. I would have gotten a notice. The building management sends emails or slips notes under the door whenever there's work being done. I glanced at the floor. No note. No email earlier. I stayed where I was. I didn't get any notice. The man shifted slightly. Last minute thing. Should only take a minute. Just need to check your pipes under the sink. Something about his voice was off. Too even, like he was careful with his words. I looked at his uniform again. There was no name tag. No building logo. Just a plain gray jumpsuit. I swallowed. I'll call the building office to confirm. Silence. Then he knocked again, harder this time. It won't take long. My fingers were cold. I backed away from the door. I'm calling the office, I said again, louder this time. Another pause. Then his voice came through, lower than before. Ma'am, I have to come in. No. I grabbed my phone from the couch and opened the building office's number. I hit call. The ringing filled my ears. I kept my eyes on the peephole. The man hadn't moved. He was still standing there, perfectly still. The call rang twice before someone answered. Building management. I kept my voice steady. Hi, is maintenance supposed to be checking plumbing right now? There was a short pause. Then, no, we don't have any maintenance scheduled for today. The air in my lungs felt thick. I forced myself to stay calm. There's a man at my door saying he's with maintenance. He doesn't have a name tag. Silence. Then, ma'am, don't open your door. Security is on their way. My hand shook as I lowered the phone. Through the peephole, I saw the man tilt his head slightly, like he was listening. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away down the hall, out of view. I stood frozen, heart pounding, until I heard the elevator ding. A few seconds later, a set of heavier footsteps came. Security. I cracked the door open when they knocked. 2 guards stood there, one holding a flashlight. I told them everything. They checked the hallway, the stairwell, even the parking garage, but the man was gone. There were no cameras in the halls, something I had never thought about before, but the guard at the front desk hadn't seen anyone matching his description enter the building. They stayed for a while, checking the area, making sure he wasn't waiting somewhere. Then they left, telling me to call immediately if anything happened again. I locked the door, put the chain on. I didn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. The next morning, I asked the building office again if they found anything. They hadn't. No one else had reported a maintenance check. No workers were scheduled for anything that night. No one knew who he was. For the next few weeks, I was on edge every time I came home. I double-checked the locks, looked behind me in the hall. I never got another knock like that again. But sometimes, when I walk to my car in the parking lot, I get the feeling someone's watching. I don't know if it's just in my head. I don't want to find out. I've been driving for Uber for a little over a year now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and most of the time, it's just like any other job. You pick people up, drop them off, maybe have a quick chat if they're in the mood for it, and move on to the next fare. Simple. It was a Saturday night when it happened. The usual crowd on weekends, people heading home from bars, night shifts, a few heading to parties. The city was quiet, the streets well lit under the hum of streetlights. My shift was almost over, but there was one last fare that popped up just as I was about to head home. I didn't think much of it. The pickup was only a few blocks away, so I figured I'd grab this last ride, drop them off, and then go straight to bed. I arrived at the address, a tall building with one of those buzzer systems, and waited for the passenger to come down. It wasn't until I saw him stepping out of the door that I started to get a weird feeling, but I didn't think too much of it at first. The guy wasn't anything special. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, the kind of outfit you don't really notice unless you're looking. His face was a little pale, and there was something off about the way he moved, like he wasn't quite fully present, if that makes sense. I didn't think about it too much. People are weird, I figured, so I just did my usual thing and opened the door for him. "Hey, man, where to?" I asked as he climbed into the back seat. He didn't answer immediately. Just sat there for a second, staring at the seat in front of him, like he was thinking about something. I need to go to 52nd Street, he finally said, in a voice that was quiet, almost too quiet, like he didn't really want to be talking. I nodded and started the car, turning onto the main road, setting the GPS. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. The usual ride. I had much worse customers before, drunk people yelling, talking about their exes, weird conversations, but this guy was different. There was something about him that made me uneasy, even though he hadn't said much yet. His eyes kept flicking to the side, like he was watching the street signs, But then, out of nowhere, he spoke again. "Take the next left," he said, his voice sharp, like he had been holding it in. I glanced at the GPS, and it didn't line up with the route I'd been given. "Ah, no, I think it's better to stay on this road. It'll be quicker." He didn't say anything for a second, just kept staring out the window. Then he repeated himself, but this time, his voice was a little more urgent. "No, take the left. It's quicker this way." Now I was starting to feel even more uncomfortable. I'd been driving this city for a while, and I knew the roads well. There was no reason to take a detour, especially not at night when things felt quieter than usual. But something about the way he said it made me hesitate. I didn't want to start an argument or deal with a guy who might get hostile, so I decided to just take the turn. I figured, maybe he knew something I didn't. I took the left, the road getting narrower the further we went. It was a part of the city I didn't usually drive through, and now I started noticing the houses getting more spaced out, fewer streetlights. It was one of those areas where the roads weren't as well maintained, and the houses looked a little older, more run down. My headlights flickered as I drove, casting shadows that made the whole scene feel more surreal. The guy didn't say a word as we drove. He was just sitting there, watching the street, like he was expecting something. I started to feel that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that tells you something's off, but you don't know what exactly. After another few minutes, I turned to ask him if he was sure this was the right way, just to make sure I hadn't missed something. But when I looked back at the rearview mirror, the seat was empty. My heart dropped into my stomach. I thought maybe he'd just moved to the other side of the seat, or maybe he'd leaned down to tie his shoes or something. But no! The back seat was completely empty. Not a single sound. Not even the seatbelt was undone. I felt my pulse start to race. I slowed down and looked in the rearview mirror again, just to double check, but there was nothing. No sign of him. For a second, I thought maybe he'd just gotten out and I hadn't seen him. But no! I hadn't heard the door open, and the car had been moving the whole time. I reached up to check the door lock, still locked. I checked the back seat again, just to be sure. Nothing. It felt like I had just entered some kind of weird, empty space. Like everything had gone still. The air felt thicker somehow, and I was left there alone, in the middle of nowhere. No sound except for the low hum of the engine. I don't even know how long I just sat there, staring at the empty back seat, my mind running in circles. Eventually, I turned the car around. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just stay there. It was dark, it was quiet, and the weird feeling that had settled in my chest was only growing stronger. I drove back the way I came, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe he had just gotten out for a second without me noticing. But I couldn't explain the way I hadn't heard the door open, the way the seat had stayed perfectly still as if he hadn't even moved. I drove back to the main road, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see him sitting there again, but there was nothing. Just empty seats. I stayed on the main roads, kept driving until I was back into more familiar parts of the city. When I finally got back home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something I couldn't explain. That guy hadn't been normal. It was like he had just disappeared, and I couldn't make sense of it. I had passengers leave before, but never like that. Never with no sign, no sound. I didn't report it. I didn't know what I would even say. I didn't have any proof, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what had just happened. I haven't had any strange fares since, but every time I pick someone up at night now, I can't help but glance at the rearview mirror, just to make sure no one's sitting back there. I don't know where to start with this, but I feel like I have to get it out. I never thought something like this would happen to me, but here we are. The whole thing started about 2 months ago, and it hasn't stopped. It's hard to explain why I didn't think much of it at first, but looking back, I really should have taken it more seriously. It started with the knocking. I was in bed, just trying to get some sleep, when I heard it for the first time. 3 knocks. Not loud, but distinct, like someone was tapping on the door. It woke me up, but I didn't think anything of it. Sometimes people knock on doors at weird hours, especially if they're drunk or confused. I figured it was someone who had gotten the wrong house. I looked out the window, saw nothing, and went back to bed. But then it happened again. The next night, same thing. 3 knocks at exactly 2:33 a.m. I didn't get up to check. I didn't want to go outside at that hour, especially if it was just some idiot messing around. It was probably some late-night person with no real reason to knock. Maybe a drunk guy looking for a friend, I thought. So, I ignored it. The 3rd night, it happened again. 3 knocks at exactly the same time, 2:33 a.m. I remember I got up this time, just to look outside through the peephole. I didn't see anyone, but I also didn't feel like opening the door. I thought it was weird, sure, but at that point, I figured it was just some late-night prank. After all, what are the odds that someone would knock at the same time 3 nights in a row, right? But then it kept happening. Night after night. 3 knocks. 2:33 a.m., sharp. I started feeling more and more unsettled. It was like whoever was doing it knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't random. They were knocking at the same time every night. I started to think it wasn't a coincidence anymore. Maybe it wasn't some drunk, maybe it was someone trying to mess with me, or worse, someone who was watching the house. It was then that I decided I needed to figure out who it was. I couldn't keep waking up every night at 2:33 a.m. wondering if someone was going to knock on my door again. It wasn't a normal thing, and I knew it wasn't a coincidence. So, I installed a security camera outside, just in case. The first night I had the camera up, I was a little anxious. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I wanted to know. I had a bad feeling in my gut, but I ignored it and went to bed, leaving the camera on. 2:33 a.m. came. Sure enough, the knocks came, just like every other night. 3 knocks, sharp and clear. I held my breath as I listened, waiting for something to happen. But when I checked the footage the next morning, what I saw made my blood run cold. The video showed the porch, like I expected. The first 2 knocks were just like usual, quiet and brief. But the 3rd knock was different. In the footage, I saw a figure, wearing a ski mask, standing on my porch. He was completely still for a few moments, and then he knocked. 3 sharp raps on the door, like it was some sort of ritual. I felt my heart race as I watched the figure step back from the door and glance around. Then, in an instant, he sprinted off the porch. I couldn't see much of him, just the figure in the ski mask running fast, almost as if he were trying to make it back to wherever he came from before anyone saw him. I was frozen in place after watching that. My mind raced. What was he doing? Why was he knocking on my door at exactly the same time every night? It didn't make any sense. I knew this wasn't a prank anymore. Whoever this was, they knew exactly what they were doing. And worse, they knew when I was at home. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, watching the footage over and over, trying to figure out who this person was, why they were doing this, and if I was in danger. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? Hey, someone knocks on my door every night at 2:33 a.m., and I think they're wearing a ski mask. They'd probably think I was crazy. But the fact that the person kept coming back night after night had me convinced they were trying to scare me. And it was working. The next few nights, I decided I'd be ready. I didn't want to just sit there and wait for it to happen again. I set up another camera, this time inside, by the door. I also kept a bat near the door, just in case. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I wasn't taking any chances. The following night, I heard the familiar knocks. 3, sharp, right at 2:33 a.m. This time, I was ready. I watched the camera feed inside, waiting for something to happen. I saw the figure in the ski mask again. He knocked. And then, just like before, he turned and sprinted off the porch. But this time, I did something I hadn't done before. I opened the door. I wasn't expecting anyone to still be there, but I thought maybe I could catch a glimpse of whoever was doing this. Maybe I'd see something that would give me a clue. The night air was cold, and the porch light flickered. I looked around, but there was no one. The street was empty. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I stood there for a minute, just looking out into the dark. I didn't know what I was looking for, but my gut told me I had to do something. I had to act before this person came back again. The next morning, I reviewed the footage from the camera again, hoping I'd missed something. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. This time, after the figure sprinted off the porch, he didn't just run down the street. He ran into the shadows of the trees, like he was waiting for something. And then, something caught my attention in the distance, another figure. 2 figures, standing just beyond the edge of the streetlight's reach. I couldn't believe it. There were 2 others, also wearing ski masks, just standing there, watching. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't know how long they had been standing there, but they were definitely waiting for the right moment. This wasn't just a random guy knocking on my door. It was something far worse. I called the police that afternoon. I didn't care how it sounded anymore. I had the footage. I had proof. They couldn't ignore it. After a while, the police came by and took a report. They reviewed the footage, and one officer even made a comment about how strange it was that the person always ran off when they thought the coast was clear. I told them about the 2 other figures I'd seen. They said they'd keep an eye on things, but no one was ever caught. They couldn't find anyone in the area matching the description I gave. It's been a few weeks now, and the knocking stopped after I reported it. I haven't heard it once since. But I still think about those figures, and I can't shake the feeling that I was being watched all along. I don't feel safe in my own house anymore. I keep the cameras up, but I'm still wondering who those people were. Why they came, and why they never tried to take anything. Just knock. 3 knocks. Every night. It's hard to even talk about what happened. I've thought about it a lot since, and every time I do, I get a pit in my stomach. I never thought I'd be posting something like this, but I think I need to get it off my chest. This isn't the kind of thing you just forget. So, a few weeks ago, I decided to sell this old chair I had sitting in my living room. It was a decent chair, nothing special, but it didn't fit with the rest of my furniture anymore. I'd gotten a new one, and the old chair had just been taking up space. I figured I'd try selling it on one of those local buy-sell sites, thinking it would be an easy way to get rid of it. Honestly, I didn't expect much, just wanted it out of my house. I posted the chair online, took a couple of pictures, and wrote a short description. Not long after, I got a message from someone. His name was Brian. He said he was interested in buying it and asked if it was still available. I told him it was and that he could come pick it up. He seemed normal at first, polite and friendly. He asked if I was available later in the evening since he worked during the day. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of meeting someone after dark, but I didn't want to turn down a sale, so I agreed. We settled on a time around 8 p.m. He said he'd be there in about 20 minutes. I didn't think anything of it at the time, just figured he worked a late shift or something. I hadn't had many people respond to my ad, so I was just happy to get rid of the chair. Around 8:15, I heard a car pull up outside my house. It was dark, and I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, waiting for him to arrive. I peered out the window to see if it was him. The car was parked a little down the street, but I couldn't see the person clearly. I figured it was just him, so I got up to open the door. I was about to step outside when I got another message from Brian. He said, "Hey, I'm outside, but I can't park right in front of your house. Is it all right if I park further down the block and walk over?" That seemed odd to me, but I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe he didn't want to block someone's driveway or was being cautious. I told him it was fine. I didn't think anything was wrong at that point, but something about the situation started to feel off. A few minutes passed, and then I heard footsteps on my front porch. I peeked through the peephole in my door and saw a man standing there. He looked normal, nothing about him stood out as unusual. Just a guy in a jacket, standing in front of my door. He waved, and I opened the door. I was smiling, trying to be friendly, but he didn't smile back. "I'm Brian," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, still feeling uneasy but not sure why. I asked him if he wanted to come inside and take a look at the chair, but he said no. He looked down at the ground for a moment, almost like he was distracted. I led him to the yard where the chair was sitting on the porch. "Is this the chair?" he asked, looking at it. "Yeah, that's the one," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded, looking it over, but then he said something that threw me off. "I need to check something. Is it okay if I go around back for a minute?" My stomach flipped. I tried to keep calm, but I asked, "What for?" "Just want to make sure it'll fit in my car," he said. His voice was calm, too calm. I should have just told him to leave right there, but for some reason, I didn't. I thought maybe I was just overthinking it. I told him the backyard was around the side and let him walk through the gate. He disappeared behind my house for a few seconds, and I could hear him walking around, checking things out. I stood at the front of the house, my mind racing a little. Something didn't feel right. It was like a little voice in the back of my head telling me to be cautious. But I ignored it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. A car parked farther down the block, right at the edge of my driveway. I hadn't seen it there before. It was a dark sedan. I squinted, trying to see if I could make out any details, but the headlights were off. There was no movement, and no one got out. I didn't recognize it, but I still didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just someone else coming to pick up a chair. A minute passed, then another. I felt a little more uncomfortable now. Brian was still in the back, and I could hear him moving around. I thought about calling him back, but before I could, I saw something strange. Two people suddenly got out of the car. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could tell they were moving towards my house. That's when it hit me. Brian had asked to go around back. Now, these two people were coming toward me, and the car was parked in a way that made it hard to see them from the street. My mind raced as I put the pieces together. I knew something was wrong. I should have trusted my gut. I started to back away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I turned to step inside, Brian walked back around the corner. He was smiling, but this time it was different. It wasn't the same polite, friendly smile from earlier. It felt forced, like he was pretending to be normal. "Everything good?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, his eyes shifting slightly toward the street. "Just needed to check something." I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't about to let him in. I wasn't about to let anyone in. "You know what, I've changed my mind," I said, my voice trembling slightly but trying to sound confident. "I think I'll just keep the chair." Brian's eyes flashed for a second, and the smile faded. He took a step forward, his posture stiff, but I stepped back, keeping my distance. He didn't say anything for a moment, then muttered something under his breath about checking with his friends. That's when I realized he wasn't alone. I turned and quickly shut the door, locking it as fast as I could. I heard footsteps on the porch, someone trying to open the door, but I didn't let it go. I dialed 911, my hands shaking, and kept my eyes on the door. Within minutes, the car drove off. Brian and the two others didn't try to force the door down, but I didn't take any chances. I stayed on the line with the operator until the police arrived. By the time they came, Brian and his friends were gone, and they couldn't find them. It felt like a close call. I've never been so scared in my life. After the police left, I went straight to the lock on the back gate and made sure it was secure. I didn't sleep much that night, and I never posted anything for sale online again. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't trusted my gut. If I'd let them in, what would they have done? I don't even want to think about it. All I know is that I got lucky. It happened a few months ago, and I still can't shake it. I don't think I ever will. I had just moved into a new apartment. It wasn't much, kind of small, but cozy enough for me and my dog, Daisy. She's a good dog, a bit nervous around new people, but she's got this protective side to her. She'd always been wary of strangers, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was getting settled in, unpacking boxes, arranging things around the apartment. The first week was pretty quiet. Daisy and I got into a routine. I'd go to work, come back, and she'd always be there waiting for me by the door. She seemed happy enough, but I started noticing something strange. Every time I'd leave the apartment, Daisy would be calm, but the moment I walked back in, she would always start growling, just low and steady, like she was waiting for something. At first, I thought maybe she just didn't like the sound of the key turning in the door or something. Dogs can be sensitive to noise, so I brushed it off. It didn't stop there, though. The growling started happening more often. Not when I came home, but in the middle of the day. I'd be sitting on the couch, watching TV or reading, and Daisy would start growling. Not at the door or window, but towards the hallway that led to my bedroom and the closet. I tried to ignore it, but it was becoming a little too consistent. Then came the night it all went wrong. It was a Wednesday, around 9 p.m. I had just finished a long day at work and was sitting down with a cup of tea, trying to relax. Daisy was next to me on the couch, lying down like she usually does. I was flipping through channels when she suddenly perked up. Her ears went straight up, and she stared down the hallway. Then she started growling, but this time it wasn't low or casual. It was more intense, like she was on alert. Her tail was stiff, and she didn't take her eyes off the hallway. I stood up and looked down the hallway, trying to see what she was reacting to. Nothing. The hallway was dark, and the bedroom door was closed, like always. I called her name softly, trying to get her attention. "Daisy, it's okay." But she just kept growling, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. I walked toward her, thinking maybe there was something outside, something she could hear that I couldn't. I checked the windows, made sure the blinds were closed tight. Everything seemed normal. But Daisy wasn't having it. She was fixated on that hallway. I thought maybe she'd heard a mouse or something. There was an old closet at the end of the hallway, a walk-in type, with old coats and storage boxes stacked in the corner. I figured it was a rat or some other critter that had gotten in somehow. "Daisy, come here," I called again, trying to snap her out of it, but she wouldn't move. Her growls grew louder. I felt uneasy, like something was off, but I didn't want to be one of those people who overreacts. I hesitated for a moment, but I figured I should check the closet. If there was a rodent in there, I could deal with it, right? So, I walked to the closet and stood in front of it, looking at Daisy. She was still staring at it, her growls now mixed with a soft whine. I slowly reached for the door handle, my heart pounding. I didn't know why, but I had this sick feeling in my stomach. Like I was about to find something I didn't want to find. I opened the closet door, and that's when everything changed. At first, I didn't see anything. The closet was filled with coats, old boxes, and some extra storage stuff. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the very back of the closet, behind a pile of coats, was a man crouched down, his knees drawn up to his chest, his eyes wide and panicked. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. There was this horrible knot in my stomach, and my entire body went cold. He wasn't just hiding. He was waiting. I could see a knife in his hand, clenched tightly, like he was ready to attack at any moment. I stared at him, and he stared back. His eyes were wide, and there was this desperate look on his face, like he knew he'd been caught but didn't know what to do next. Daisy was barking now, her growls turning into loud, angry barks. It snapped me out of my shock. I backed up slowly, heart racing. The man didn't move, just sat there, clutching the knife. His expression didn't change. He didn't speak. He just watched me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at him, but I finally managed to turn around and run. I bolted toward the phone in the living room and called 911, my hand shaking so much I could barely dial. The operator answered quickly, and I could barely get the words out. I told her there was a man in my closet, and that he had a knife. I don't think I even made sense when I was speaking. I was so panicked, my mind spinning. The operator asked if I could leave the apartment, but I told her I couldn't. I couldn't risk him getting away. So, I stayed on the line, waiting, pacing back and forth, listening for any noise. The barking from Daisy didn't stop, and every time I heard something, I thought it was him moving closer. My heart was pounding in my chest. I must have stayed on the phone with the 911 operator for what felt like forever. It felt like it was taking an eternity for the police to arrive. I don't remember how long it took, but when they finally did, I was so relieved, I almost collapsed. They came in, guns drawn, and cleared the apartment quickly. When they reached the closet, the man was still there. They told me to step back as they arrested him. I could barely breathe, watching them handcuff him and drag him out. The man didn't struggle, didn't say anything. He was eerily calm. They asked me if I knew him, and I told them I didn't. I had no idea who he was or how he got in. The police said he'd been living in my closet for days, maybe longer. They found empty food wrappers, some old clothes, and personal items he'd been using to make himself comfortable. It was like he'd been hiding in plain sight, watching me without me knowing. They also told me that he'd been in and out of trouble with the law before, but nothing like this. They said it looked like he was just waiting for the right moment to do something, maybe attack me, maybe steal from me. They couldn't say for sure. The police took the man away, and I was left standing there, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I still don't know how he got in, or how long he had been there. But what I do know is that I was lucky Daisy was there. If she hadn't been so alert, I might never have found him. I changed the locks that night. I haven't felt safe in my own home since. Every little noise makes me jump, and sometimes I can't help but glance at the closet, even though I know no one is hiding there anymore. But I'll never forget the way he looked at me, the way he didn't move or make a sound, just waiting. I've always been the type of person who values my privacy. I work from home, so my routine is predictable and my space is mine. I spend most of my time in my office upstairs, a small room with a desk, a computer, and bookshelves lined with my favorite novels. I don't have many visitors, and I like it that way. My friends know to text me before stopping by, and I rarely go out unless I have to. I wasn't used to anyone coming into my house uninvited, so when something strange happened, it left me completely unsettled. It started on Wednesday, around 2 p.m. I had been working in my office all morning, with my headphones on, completely absorbed in my tasks. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I've always appreciated. I don't even remember when the last time I heard any noises from outside was, maybe the wind rustling the trees or the sound of a car passing by, but that was it. Everything felt normal, just as it always had. I lost track of time, as I often do when I'm in the zone. By the time I looked at the clock again, I realized it was almost 4 p.m., and I hadn't moved in hours. I stood up, stretched my legs, and decided to take a break. I went downstairs to grab a coffee. The moment I stepped off the last stair, I froze. The front door was wide open. I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out if I had left it open by accident. I was sure I'd locked it that morning. My mind raced. I walked over to the door, stood in the doorway, and looked out. Nothing seemed unusual at first. The neighborhood was quiet, as always, with only the distant hum of traffic from a few streets away. I stepped out onto the porch, glanced around, but saw no one. Still, something felt off. A strange sense of unease settled in my chest. I looked back inside the house, and that's when I noticed the muddy footprints. They were all over the floor, leading from the entryway and toward the living room. There was no mistaking it, someone had been inside my house. The prints were fresh, their dark, muddy smudges stark against the hardwood floor. My heart began to race, and I quickly stepped back inside, closing the door behind me, as if doing that might somehow keep whatever had happened outside. I had locked the door, hadn't I? I was sure I had. But there it was, wide open, as though someone had walked right in. I turned around and looked at the rest of the house. No lights were on. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but the feeling of something being off, something being wrong, gnawed at me. I walked cautiously into the living room, following the trail of muddy footprints. The carpet in the living room was untouched, but I could see a few more prints leading toward the kitchen. I checked the rest of the house, my mind racing, trying to find something that was missing, something that would explain what had happened. But nothing was gone. My wallet was still on the kitchen counter. My keys were in the bowl by the door. Nothing had been disturbed, except for the muddy footprints. Nothing was missing. No drawers had been opened, no cabinets rifled through. I walked through every room, checking and double-checking for anything out of place, but it all seemed untouched. Whoever had come in hadn't taken anything, but they had been there. I could feel it. I could feel their presence lingering in the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood still in the living room, looking around. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I had been home the entire time, working upstairs. I didn't hear anyone come in, I didn't hear the door open, and I didn't hear anyone walking around. I hadn't seen or heard a thing. How had they gotten in? How had I not noticed? I walked back to the front door, trying to piece it together. I checked the lock. It was still in place, just as it had been when I left it. No sign of forced entry. No broken windows, no tampered locks, nothing. It was as if the person had simply opened the door and walked in. I stood there, staring at the door for a long time, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it someone who knew me? Someone who had a key? But I had no one close enough to even consider that. I didn't have a boyfriend, a roommate, or anyone I'd trust with a spare key. I had never had issues with safety before. I didn't know where to start looking for answers. I stood there in my doorway for what felt like an eternity, feeling vulnerable, exposed, and unsure of what to do next. My first instinct was to call the police, but I wasn't sure what they would be able to do. There was no sign of a break-in. There was no way to prove anything had been stolen, no way to know if this person had intended to steal anything. I didn't even have any idea who they were or why they'd come into my house in the first place. After a few minutes, I grabbed my phone and called my friend Sam. She'd known me since college, and I trusted her to help me think this through. I told her what happened, my voice shaky. I found muddy footprints in my house, I said. The door was open, and I don't know who came in or how they got in. Nothing's missing, but I feel like someone was here. Sam's voice came through the phone, calm but concerned. Call the police. They need to know about this. Even if nothing's gone, it's still a break-in. You don't know if they're still inside, or if they'll come back. It made sense. The fact that nothing was taken didn't mean it wasn't serious. I wasn't sure if I was scared of the intrusion or more of the unknown who had done this, and what were they looking for? I had no answers. The police, on the other hand, might at least offer some. I hung up with Sam and dialed the police. The dispatcher was polite, but her voice did nothing to ease the cold dread that had settled deep in my stomach. I tried to explain what had happened as clearly as I could, but the entire time I was talking, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, the door, the feeling of someone being in my space. By the time the police arrived, I was feeling more unsettled than ever. The officers were thorough. They checked the door, the locks, and even the surrounding area. But there were no signs of forced entry. They took the footprints seriously, though, and they took pictures of the scene. Still, they didn't have much to go on. We'll make a report, one of the officers said, but without anything missing, it's hard to say what this person wanted. We'll keep an eye on things, but be sure to lock all your doors and windows. And call us if anything else happens. I didn't feel any safer, but I nodded. The officers left, and I locked every door in the house before heading back upstairs to my office. I couldn't concentrate on work. My thoughts kept circling back to the same question: who had been in my house? What were they after? I don't know if I'll ever get answers. I haven't found anything unusual since, but I still check the locks every night before bed. And when I hear any little noise, I freeze, waiting for something to happen. I know someone was inside my house that day. I don't know who they were or what they were after, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never feel the same about my home again. I was alone that night. It had rained all day. The power went out sometime after 9. I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the trees hitting the lines behind the house. It's happened before, but never for more than an hour. My phone was at 40%. I lit one candle and stayed in the living room. It was too quiet. No fridge humming. No heater. Just the tapping of rain against the windows. I didn't feel scared at first. More annoyed than anything. I had work the next morning and didn't want to go to bed with no heat or alarm. The house felt smaller with everything off. I sat there with the phone in my hand, checking for signal every few minutes. The bars kept disappearing and coming back. No service, then one bar, then none again. My flashlight app worked though. I used it to walk to the kitchen and check the fuse box. The fuse box is in the laundry room of the kitchen. I stepped over the pile of laundry I'd left on the floor earlier. I held my phone up and opened the panel. Nothing looked wrong, but I flipped a few switches anyway. Nothing came back on. That's when I heard the floor creak. Not loud, just a soft sound, like a heel pressing down slow. It came from the direction of the hallway. I turned the flashlight toward it and didn't see anything. I figured it was the wood settling, maybe from the temperature change. I've heard that kind of thing before. But something about it felt different this time. When I turned back toward the living room, the light passed over the tile floor, and I saw the prints. They were wet. Bare feet. They started from the kitchen, turned toward the hallway, then stopped near the back door. I stood still and didn't move. The light shook a little in my hand. The rain was still going outside, but the prints weren't fading like they were fresh. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear anything until that creak. I followed the prints back toward the kitchen. My feet were dry. I hadn't stepped in water. I hadn't gone outside. No windows open. No leaks. I checked the sink. It was dry. The fridge was still dark, the floor dry around it. But the prints, they were full. Toes, heel, even the arches. Like someone had walked inside straight from rain or mud. I moved slow, light sweeping the floor, then the counter, then the doorway. No one was there. I didn't hear anything. The prints kept going toward the laundry room. I checked the back door. It was locked. Chain still on. But the rug in front of the door was pushed back. Not by much. Just enough to show that it had moved. I felt sick in my stomach. I backed away from the door and turned toward the hallway. If someone had come in, they had to still be inside. The only way out was past me, and I hadn't heard a thing. I checked the front door. Still locked. Bolted. No sign of damage. I went to the bedroom, not to sleep, but to get the only thing I had: pepper spray in the drawer. My hands were cold. I kept the flashlight aimed at the ground. I walked the hallway and opened each door one by one. Bathroom. Closet. Nothing. I opened the guest room last. The one at the end of the hall. I had cleaned it that morning. The bed was still made. But the closet door was open about 2 inches. I always keep it shut. I didn't go near it right away. I stayed by the door and listened. I couldn't hear breathing or shifting, but the smell in the room had changed. Damp, like soil or wet fabric. I walked closer, slow, the light shaking more now. I raised the spray can with my other hand. I opened the door fast and backed away. No one was in there. Not standing, not crouched. Just empty shelves and a box of old shoes. The smell was stronger. I checked behind the curtain, under the bed. Nothing. I stood there a while trying to listen for any other sound. That's when I saw it. A wet handprint on the wall just above the light switch. Just one. Not smeared. Like someone touched the wall as they passed it. The print was low. At shoulder height. It hadn't been there earlier. I locked myself in my room after that. I pushed the dresser in front of the door and stayed sitting on the floor with my back to the wall. I didn't sleep. I kept the light on until my phone died. I kept the spray in my hand. The prints had led back toward the back door, but the door had still been locked. It made no sense. When the sun came up, I got dressed and moved the dresser. The house looked different in daylight. No more prints on the tile. They'd dry overnight. But the rug near the door was still off-center. I looked around again with the morning light. I found a small scuff mark on the outside of the back door, right near the edge of the frame, like something had pried at it. Later that afternoon, I had someone from the locksmith place come check. He said the door frame had been tampered with. Not broken in the usual way, but enough to make the lock slip if the pressure was right. He replaced the whole thing. I had him change the locks on every door after that. I added cameras too. One in the hallway. One outside above the porch. One in the laundry room facing the door. I kept watching the footage for weeks after, every night. I never saw him. I don't even know if it was a him. But those prints were too big to be a kid's. Too wide. The step length was adult. It never happened again. But I still check the floors every night now. I still keep the spray next to the bed. And I never walk into a dark room without a light. I was home alone that evening, enjoying the quiet after a long day. The neighborhood was calm, and the sun had just set, casting a dim light through the windows. I was reading a book in the living room when I heard faint noises coming from the front door. At first, I dismissed them, thinking it might be the wind or a stray cat. But the sounds persisted, resembling the subtle jingling of keys and the gentle rattle of the door handle. Curiosity mixed with unease compelled me to approach the door quietly. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man standing there. He appeared to be in his late 40s, with an average build, wearing a plain gray shirt and dark pants. His face was calm, almost expressionless, as he methodically tried different keys on my door. A ring of keys hung from his belt, and he selected them one by one, inserting each into the lock and turning gently. My heart began to race. I hadn't called for a locksmith or any maintenance. I double-checked my phone to confirm I hadn't forgotten any appointments or services. Nothing. I decided to confront him through the door, keeping it firmly locked. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing?" The man didn't flinch. He stopped what he was doing and looked directly at the peephole, as if he could see me through it. His eyes were calm, almost too calm. "Just a locksmith here for a job," he replied in a monotone voice. I felt a chill run down my spine. "I didn't call a locksmith," I said firmly. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering his next words. "Got a work order for this address," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. He held it up, but the writing was too small and faded for me to read through the peephole. Something felt incredibly off. I hadn't requested any services, and there was no reason for a locksmith to be at my door unannounced. I decided to call the police. Stepping away from the door, I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services, explaining the situation in a hushed voice. The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be dispatched immediately. Returning to the door, I noticed the man was still there, now trying a different set of keys. "I've called the police," I announced loudly. "They'll be here any minute." The man paused, his hand resting on the door handle. He sighed softly, almost as if he were disappointed, then turned and walked away without another word. I watched through the window as he strolled down the driveway and disappeared into the night. Minutes later, a police car arrived. I explained everything to the officer, who took down the details and assured me they would patrol the area throughout the night. They advised me to be cautious and to call immediately if the man returned. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak and groan of the house made me jump. I couldn't shake the image of the man's calm demeanor and the way he had methodically tried to unlock my door. The following day, I had a reputable locksmith change all the locks and install additional security measures. I also informed my neighbors about the incident, urging them to be vigilant. Days turned into weeks, and there were no further incidents. But the experience left me shaken, a constant reminder of how quickly one's sense of security can be shattered. This happened about a year ago, and I still can't quite wrap my mind around it. I've kept quiet about it, mostly, but after everything that happened, I feel like I need to share it somewhere. The whole thing still makes me feel uneasy when I think back on it. Last summer, I decided to take a long road trip across the country. I had just graduated and had some time off before starting my new job, so I figured I'd spend a few weeks just driving around, seeing new places. I didn't plan anything too detailed, just loosely mapped out a few cities I wanted to hit and let the road take me where it would. No rush, no deadlines. It was one of those trips where the freedom of it all made me feel like I could disappear into the scenery, and I did. I'm someone who likes to keep things simple, so I had a small disposable camera with me. I didn't want to rely too much on my phone for photos. I wanted something old school, something tangible. The kind of camera that didn't have a lot of settings, where you just took the picture and hoped for the best. I filled the roll over the course of 2 weeks, snapping photos of random sites, old diners, and quiet little towns. When I got back home, I went to the photo lab to get the film developed. The guy behind the counter was your typical film store worker, a little disinterested, but polite enough. I handed him the camera and waited for him to process it. As he handed the envelope back to me, he made a strange comment. "You got some interesting shots in here," he said, sounding almost confused. "Yeah," I replied, unsure of what he meant. "Nothing wrong with them, just odd. You might want to take a look." I figured he was just commenting on the weird angles or maybe the lighting. I didn't think much of it at first. But as soon as I got home and started flipping through the pictures, I realized what he was talking about. In nearly every picture from the trip, there was someone in the background. At first, I thought maybe I'd just caught someone in the frame without meaning to, maybe someone walking by, or just a random person who happened to be near when I clicked the shutter. But then I started noticing something strange. The same man was in multiple photos. The man was always in the background, in different cities, standing in the distance, staring directly at the camera. It wasn't like a brief moment or someone who had walked past. It was as if he'd been intentionally positioned there, in the exact spot I was taking the picture from, staring at me. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was a coincidence, a series of odd shots. But as I looked at the photos more closely, I could see how he looked at the same man every time. Tall, wearing a dark jacket and a hat. His face was hard to make out in most of the pictures because of the distance, but you could tell he was looking straight at me. And he was in nearly every city I had visited. It started to get under my skin. I started retracing my steps, mentally going through each of the places I had visited. I'd taken a picture at a gas station in Arizona, and there he was, just standing behind a car in the background, watching me. In another, taken outside a small diner in New Mexico, he was standing next to a telephone pole, staring through the window at me. The more I looked, the more I realized he had appeared in nearly every shot I took. One picture stood out more than the others. I'd stopped in a small park in Texas to stretch my legs. I took a shot of the fountain, the green grass around it, and the old stone pathway. It seemed like a peaceful moment. But when I looked at the developed image, I saw him standing near the bushes behind the fountain. He was so far back in the shot that it took me a while to even notice. He was still watching. His posture was rigid, like he was standing still for hours. I could feel my heart rate pick up as I examined the photos. I hadn't seen him when I was taking the pictures. I didn't even remember noticing him at all when I was at those places. He was always so far off in the background that I didn't think much of it. But now that I was seeing it, it made no sense. I was alone for most of the trip. Who was this man? I started to panic. I called a friend, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was just overreacting, seeing patterns where there weren't any. But when I showed him the photos, he said something that chilled me. Dude, that guy's following you. He's been following me the whole time. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but now that he said it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. My friend asked if I'd felt like I was being watched during the trip, and honestly, I hadn't. I never noticed anything strange. But how could I have missed it? How could I have missed this guy? I went back through the photos again, obsessing over every detail. I studied the background of each picture, looking for any sign that I might have missed. In one of the shots, taken in a small town in Wyoming, I saw him again, much closer this time, standing by a fence, his face now partially visible. He wasn't just watching from far away, he was right there, not far from where I had parked. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was getting closer. I still had the negatives from the film, so I decided to go back to the photo lab and ask the worker if he had noticed anything strange about the photos when he developed them. When I showed him the pictures, he looked just as confused as I had been. "I don't know," he said, "it's just regular film. I didn't notice anything strange about it. But I can't help you out too much. Maybe just try to forget about it." I was already feeling paranoid by then, and his response did nothing to calm me down. I started wondering if the guy at the store knew more than he let on. But I couldn't ask him directly. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I was starting to lose sleep over the whole thing. I stopped looking at the photos after a while, but the images kept coming back to me in my mind. The man, always just out of view, always lurking in the background. It made me feel like I couldn't escape him, like he was always there, watching, no matter where I went. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He had to have been following me from the very beginning. But why? I still don't know who that man is, or what his intentions were. I haven't seen him again, and I don't want to. I try not to think about it too much, but every now and then, I'll get a creeping feeling, like I'm being watched. The worst part is, I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again. I don't know how long he'd been following me, or if I'll ever run into him again. But I can't forget about those photos. The images of that man, standing in the background, always watching. And I don't think I'll ever be able to get rid of the feeling that I was never truly alone on that road trip. This happened about 2 months ago, and I still feel uneasy thinking about it. I had just moved into a new apartment, and it was my first weekend alone since the move. It was late, around 10:30 or 11 p.m., and I didn't feel like cooking. So, I decided to order some food. I went online, picked something quick, and ordered it. I knew the place was close by, so I expected it to be here in 30 minutes or less. I had my couch all set up for a relaxing night, Netflix queued up, blankets ready. I figured I'd have a quiet evening to myself. When the app showed my food was out for delivery, I didn't think much of it. But 45 minutes went by and no one showed up. I checked the app again and it said the driver had arrived at my apartment complex. I thought that was weird since no one had knocked yet, but I figured maybe they were just finishing up something. I gave it another 10 minutes, and then I got a call. It was the delivery driver. "Hey, this is Mike from restaurant name. I'm downstairs, but I can't find your apartment." I felt a little frustrated but tried to stay calm. "I'm in building name, apartment, number. Just come up to the second floor and turn left. It's right there." "Oh, okay, great. I'll be up in a minute." I waited for a couple more minutes, and when I heard a knock at the door, I got up and opened it. The man standing there was in his late 30s, average build, wearing the usual delivery uniform. His hair was messy, and he was holding the bag of food. Nothing too out of the ordinary, but there was something about the way he stood in the doorway that made me feel a little off. "Hey, sorry it took so long," he said. "It's been a long night, you know how it is." I nodded, "It's fine, no problem." But then he stepped forward, and before I could react, he asked, "You want me to bring the food inside?" I wasn't expecting that. It was late, and I was tired. I didn't really want him hanging around, but I didn't want to be rude either, so I just said, "Sure, I guess. Thanks." He walked in, setting the food down on the counter, but he didn't leave. He started taking off his jacket, even though it wasn't cold in the apartment, and then looked around like he was checking the place out. I thought maybe he was just one of those overly friendly people, but I could tell something was off. "Nice place you got here," he said, walking around like he had all the time in the world. "Ah, thanks," I replied, trying to keep things casual. "I just moved in a couple of weeks ago." He nodded like he was really interested, but his eyes lingered on things in the apartment longer than was normal. He was taking in the details too much, like he was inspecting the space. After a few seconds of awkward silence, he said, "You alone?" I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't like I had a problem with answering simple questions, but it felt strange. "Yeah, just me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ah, I get it. I'm the same way," he said with a chuckle. He walked over to my kitchen counter where I had placed the food. "You know, I could make you a drink if you want. Like a soda or something," he said, looking over at the fridge. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, hoping he'd take the hint. But instead of leaving like I thought he would, he stayed where he was. "Yeah, I get it. You probably don't know me, right? I mean, I've been doing deliveries for a while now. People don't always trust a stranger, I get that." I just smiled awkwardly, hoping he'd finish his business and leave. But he didn't. Instead, he started moving around the apartment like he was making himself comfortable. "So, what kind of stuff do you like to do for fun?" he asked, his voice now sounding much more familiar, like we were old friends. I wasn't sure how to respond. I felt uncomfortable now, like I had invited a stranger into my home and couldn't get rid of him. He was starting to stand too close for comfort, and his presence was overwhelming. "I'm just gonna eat now," I said, trying to take control of the situation. It's getting late, so I really need to get some sleep after this. His face didn't change, but there was this moment where his eyes seemed to harden. It wasn't a look of anger, but something more unsettling. "I'm sure you don't want to eat alone," he said with a grin that made me feel even more uncomfortable. "I don't mind keeping you company while you eat." "No, that's okay," I said quickly, stepping back toward the door. "I really need to." Before I could finish, he reached into the bag of food, pulling out the drink I had ordered. "You didn't get a drink, huh? Let me make it easier for you." At that point, something in my gut just snapped. I knew I needed him to leave, now. I walked to the door, keeping my back to him, and opened it. "I really need you to go now," I said firmly, my voice trembling just slightly. He didn't leave right away. Instead, he looked at me for a moment with that same weird smile and said, "All right, well, if you change your mind, just let me know. I'll be around." I didn't even respond. I just stepped back and closed the door behind him. My heart was pounding, and I locked the door immediately, then leaned against it for a few seconds to catch my breath. I had a weird, anxious feeling in my chest, and I couldn't stop thinking about how he'd lingered inside my apartment for way too long, how he tried to act so casual, like he wasn't crossing lines. The next morning, I thought about calling the delivery service to report him, but then I worried I might be overreacting. What if it was just a weird coincidence, or maybe I was just paranoid? I don't know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I don't order food anymore at night. I don't want to risk something like that happening again. I still don't know if I should have done more, but I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It felt like I was in danger, but I didn't know why or from what. All I know is that it was one of the scariest moments I've ever had. I'm not sure where to even begin with this. I still don't know if what happened that night was real or if I just imagined the whole thing. I've told a few people about it, but no one really seems to believe me. I've tried to forget it, but the memory keeps creeping back. Maybe sharing it here will help me make sense of it. It all started a couple of months ago. I had recently moved to the area for work, and I didn't really know many people. I kept to myself mostly, but there was this one girl from the office, Sarah, who had been friendly to me since I arrived. We would chat occasionally during lunch breaks, and she seemed nice enough. One afternoon, she invited me to a party that her friend was throwing that weekend. At first, I hesitated. I'm not really a party person, and I didn't know Sarah that well. But she was insistent. She said it would be fun, and that I'd meet a lot of great people. So, I figured why not. I didn't have any plans, and it might be a good way to get to know a few more people. The day of the party, I got a text from Sarah around 5 p.m. She gave me the address and told me to come around 8 o'clock. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now I wish I had paid more attention to the details. The address she sent me was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. It was on the outskirts, near a bunch of warehouses and industrial buildings. I remember thinking it was a bit strange. I mean, who throws a party in a warehouse? But I assumed it was just one of those things where people wanted to be away from the usual spots. When I got to the location, I felt an immediate sense of unease. The building looked like it hadn't been used in years. The lights were off, and there was no sign of life. I sat in my car for a moment, debating whether I should just leave. But I had already driven out there, and I didn't want to seem rude. So, I grabbed my purse and got out. The front door to the warehouse was unlocked, which I thought was a bit odd. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The place was dark, and the only light came from a few string lights hanging from the ceiling. There was a strange smell in the air, kind of like dust and something else I couldn't place. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. I walked a few steps further into the warehouse, glancing around. The place was huge, with high ceilings and empty space all around. There was no furniture, no decorations, just empty floor space and more of those string lights hanging down in the corners. I wasn't sure if I was in the right place. Maybe they were still setting up. I pulled out my phone and checked the address again. It was definitely the right location. I texted Sarah, asking where everyone was. The minutes ticked by with no response. The quiet was unnerving, but I didn't want to seem too paranoid, so I decided to give her a call. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, telling her I was there and asking if she was around. I stood in the middle of the empty warehouse, feeling more and more out of place. My phone buzzed a few minutes later, and I thought it might be Sarah texting back. But when I looked at the screen, it was just a message from my coworker. Nothing urgent. I looked around again, trying to figure out what to do. The whole building seemed deserted. I was starting to feel like I'd been set up, or maybe Sarah had given me the wrong address. I decided to leave and get back in my car. But as I turned to walk toward the door, I heard something. A sound, a soft thud. Like something moving just beyond the reach of the light. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. I called out again, "Hello?" No answer. I felt a cold chill run through me, but I shook it off, convincing myself it was just the building settling. But then, the noise came again. A faint sound, like footsteps this time, moving from the far end of the warehouse. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty space in front of me, wondering if I should just leave. But the curiosity got the better of me. I slowly walked toward the noise, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and my hands started to sweat. My head was spinning with thoughts of what could be going on. As I neared the far side of the warehouse, I saw a shadow moving along the wall. A person. The figure was too far away to make out any details, but I knew it wasn't Sarah. I felt my stomach drop. "Hello?" I called out again, trying to sound confident, but my voice was shaky. "Is anyone there?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly started to walk toward me. I froze, watching as it got closer. I was too scared to move. I had no idea who this person was or what they wanted. All I knew was that I had walked into something I shouldn't have. Just as the figure stepped into the dim light, I saw his face. It was a man, maybe in his mid-30s. He wasn't wearing anything that stood out, just a plain t-shirt and jeans. But his eyes were wide and vacant. Like he wasn't fully aware of where he was. Or like he was waiting for something. I took a step back, my mind racing. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer. He just kept staring at me, walking closer. It was like he hadn't even heard me. I felt panic rise up in my chest. I turned and bolted toward the exit. I didn't care if I looked crazy, I just needed to get out. As I sprinted across the warehouse, I heard him following me. The footsteps were getting louder, closer. I reached the door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind me. My heart was racing in my chest, and I could barely catch my breath. I didn't even bother looking back. I just ran to my car and drove off, not stopping until I reached my apartment. I never went back to that warehouse. I tried texting Sarah again, calling her, but she never responded. I haven't heard from her since that night. I don't know if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if something more sinister was happening there. I just know that whatever it wasn't a party. I still can't shake the feeling that someone was watching me that night. I still wonder if the man was just a stranger or if he was waiting for someone else to show up. What I do know is that I don't trust Sarah anymore, and I will never forget the look in that man's eyes. If anyone knows anything about that warehouse, I'd appreciate any info. I don't know if what happened to me that night was just a coincidence, but I'm still afraid of what I might have walked into. I found a phone in the bushes one evening while I was walking home from the store. I wasn't expecting it. It was just lying there, half buried in the dirt, like someone had dropped it and then just left it. I bent down to pick it up, thinking maybe it could be a lost item that someone might want back. The screen was cracked, but the phone still turned on when I pressed the power button. It didn't take long for the phone to boot up. The screen was locked, but the wallpaper was a photo of what looked like an old park, maybe somewhere near here. I thought it was strange that the phone didn't have a passcode, so I started flipping through the apps, trying to see if I could figure out who it belonged to. It wasn't until I got to the photos that things got weird. At first, the photos seemed pretty normal. Just a few selfies and pictures of a group of people I didn't recognize. There were some shots of a family on what looked like a vacation, a few pictures of meals or landmarks, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I started noticing something strange. There were pictures of people sleeping. Not selfies, not pose pictures, just people in beds, eyes closed, as if they were taken without the person knowing. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured maybe the phone belonged to someone who had a habit of taking pictures when they weren't supposed to. People do strange things with their phones, right? But the more I scrolled, the weirder it got. The photos weren't just of random people. They were of people in their bedrooms, sleeping. Some photos were blurry, as if they had been taken in the dark, but others were clear. I could see the details of the bed sheets, the pillows, the way people slept. In some photos, you could see the peacefulness of someone in deep sleep, while in others, the shot seemed almost too close, like the person holding the camera was right there in the room with them. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. I flipped through more pictures, hoping to make sense of it, but there was no explanation. The photos didn't make sense. Why would someone take so many pictures of people sleeping? And then I saw it. The last few photos were different. These weren't just random people. These were pictures of me, taken from outside my window. I could feel my stomach drop. The first one was a wide shot of my living room window. The blinds were closed, but I could still tell it was my place. I immediately checked to make sure everything in my apartment was how I left it. The second picture was a close-up shot of my window, my reflection barely visible in the glass. I couldn't see the person who had taken the photo, but it was clear they were standing just outside, trying to get a shot of me through the glass. I panicked. I checked the window, but the blinds were still down. The room was still dark, but the unease was settling in, thick and suffocating. I scrolled through the rest of the photos, my heart pounding. Each one got closer. In one, I could see myself sitting on my couch, my back turned to the window, oblivious to whoever was outside. The final photo sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was of me sleeping in my bed. The shot was taken from the corner of my room, through the window that was barely cracked open. It was so clear. I could see the way the light from the street lamp outside illuminated the edges of my sheets, the outline of my body beneath them. I couldn't remember ever seeing someone standing there, watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was about to throw up, but I didn't know what to do. I kept staring at the photo, my own face staring back at me, unaware that someone had been watching me sleep. I shut off the phone and stood there for a few minutes, trying to collect myself. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to think or who to trust. It was one of those situations where you don't know whether to panic or try to stay calm. But I knew I had to act fast. I went straight to my front door, locking it behind me, and stepped outside to look around. The night was quiet. No one was out there. The street was empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. The first thing I did was call the police. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say, but I knew I had to report this somehow. When they answered, I explained everything, how I'd found the phone, the photos, and how someone had been taking pictures of me. They asked if I had any idea who could have been doing it, but I didn't. I didn't recognize anyone in the photos, and I couldn't think of anyone who would want to do this to me. The officer who responded seemed skeptical at first, like maybe I was overreacting. But I could hear the change in his voice when I mentioned the photos of me in my apartment. I told him everything I knew about the pictures from outside my window, the way the camera was zoomed in so close. He said they'd send someone to take a look at my place, and that they would start an investigation into the phone. I felt sick the whole time I waited. The police arrived about an hour later, and they took the phone to look for any evidence. I told them about the photos and the way the phone had been unlocked, like whoever owned it hadn't cared to keep anything hidden. They searched the area around my apartment, but no one was found. That's when they told me something that made my blood run cold. The phone wasn't registered to anyone. There was no name attached to it, no information that could identify the owner. It was as if the phone had just appeared out of nowhere. The police told me they would keep it in case they found something useful, but I wasn't sure how much that would help. For days, I kept waiting for the police to find something. They never did. It was like whoever had been watching me just vanished. The phone, the photos, the whole thing, it all felt like a bad dream. I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who took those photos was still out there, watching. I started taking extra precautions. I bought a security camera for my front door, installed extra locks, and kept the blinds closed at all times. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. I still hear strange noises at night, sometimes. I don't know if it's my imagination, but it's always there. That nagging feeling, like someone is just outside, waiting. The police never found out who was behind it. I never found out how that phone ended up in the bushes or why someone was taking pictures of me. But I know one thing for sure, I'll never look out my window the same way again. I've been a landlord for a few years now, managing a few rental properties in a fairly quiet part of town. It's a decent gig, steady work, but nothing too crazy. I've had the usual ups and downs with tenants, but nothing that ever made me feel too uneasy. That was until I started getting complaints about one of my tenants, Daniel. Daniel was in his late 20s when he moved in, quiet, kept to himself, and always paid his rent on time. At first, I didn't have any issues with him. He had a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of the building. Nothing remarkable. But after a few months, some of my other tenants started mentioning strange things. One woman, Jessica, who lived on the floor above him, said that her heating would turn on in the middle of the night, even though she hadn't touched the thermostat. Another tenant, Mike, complained that things in his apartment had been moved around. His kitchen drawer would be open, things would be out of place. I thought maybe people were just being paranoid, but the complaints kept coming. and they all seemed to be linked to Daniel's apartment in some way. I'll admit, I wasn't sure what to think at first. Maybe I was just being paranoid myself. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I started to wonder if Daniel had something to do with it. He was always home, never really had friends over, and I hadn't seen him leave the building much. I had no proof, but something felt off. One evening, after another complaint from Jessica about strange noises coming from the walls, I decided to do something I'd never done before, set up a hidden camera in the hallway. The building wasn't huge, just 4 apartments, and I figured it was worth checking out, just to see if anything unusual was happening. I knew Daniel was likely the culprit, but I wanted to catch him in the act. I found a small, discreet camera I had lying around, one I had used in the past for security purposes, and placed it on a shelf behind a potted plant in the hallway. The camera was pointed toward the entrance to Daniel's apartment, with a good view of the hallway and the door. I didn't want to overdo it, just enough to see if Daniel was sneaking into other units or doing something he wasn't supposed to. For the next few days, I checked the footage, but it was pretty uneventful. Daniel would come and go at usual times, and nothing strange seemed to happen. I was beginning to think I was just being paranoid when something showed up on the footage. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Daniel was coming home late one night, after dark. I could see the hallway light flicker on as he walked toward his door. But then, as he was unlocking the door, something strange happened. He paused for a moment, his head turning toward the hallway. Almost like he was listening. I couldn't hear anything on the footage, but I saw him glance around, then look down at the floor as if checking for something. His movements were slow and deliberate. Then, he entered his apartment, and the camera recorded nothing else for the rest of the night. I thought it was odd, but it wasn't enough to go on, so I brushed it off and didn't think much more of it. The next day, I checked the footage again, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The camera caught Daniel leaving his apartment around 10 a.m. He was dressed normally, but what caught my attention was the way he moved. He wasn't walking directly toward the stairs to leave, as he usually did. Instead, he walked down the hallway, then stopped in front of another tenant's door, Mike's door. For a few moments, he just stood there, staring at it, as if he was waiting for something. Then, he quickly moved on and disappeared from view. I didn't know what to make of it. I figured it was some sort of strange coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to check Mike's apartment later, just to see if anything had been disturbed. When I opened the door to Mike's place, it was obvious right away that something was off. His living room had been ransacked, his couch cushions were tossed around, and his coffee table was pushed to the side. There was a drawer in the kitchen that had been pulled out, its contents spilled across the floor. I immediately texted Mike to ask if he had been inside, but he assured me he hadn't. He hadn't even been home for a few days. At this point, I started to feel a bit sick. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Daniel might be behind all of this. Maybe he'd been sneaking into the other apartments when people weren't around. It was the only thing that made sense. I needed more evidence before confronting him, so I decided to dig deeper. I installed the camera again, this time a bit closer to Daniel's door. I wanted to catch him in the act, to get something more concrete. The next few days felt like a blur. I was constantly checking the footage, hoping to catch something that would make all of this make sense. And then, one night, I finally got what I was looking for. Daniel left his apartment again, just like before, and I watched as he walked down the hallway. This time, however, he didn't stop at Mike's door. He kept walking. I saw him pause in front of another door, the vacant unit at the end of the hall. He stood there for a few moments, his hand resting on the doorknob. My heart started racing. There was no reason for him to be there. The unit had been vacant for months, and I hadn't shown it to anyone in weeks. No one was supposed to be inside. Then, with a quick glance over his shoulder, Daniel opened the door and slipped inside. I immediately froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had to know what was going on in there, so I grabbed my keys and rushed to the vacant apartment, praying I wasn't too late. When I reached the door, I could hear movement inside. The sound of things shuffling, and then a faint creak, like someone was adjusting something. I didn't knock or announce myself. I just pushed the door open, hoping that I wasn't too far behind. What I saw inside stopped me in my tracks. Daniel was standing in the middle of the room, looking around. But it wasn't the apartment that shocked me, it was what he was doing. He was kneeling down by one of the walls, pulling a loose panel away. I could see now that the walls weren't as solid as they seemed. There were small holes drilled into them, hidden by furniture and decor. And behind them, I realized, was a series of vents just big enough for someone to peek through. Daniel was watching other tenants. He'd been watching them through the walls. It was obvious now. My blood ran cold as I understood what he had been doing. He'd been sneaking into the other apartments through hidden passages, spying on them, moving their things, probably hoping they wouldn't notice. And when they did, he was careful to cover his tracks. I stood there for a long time, just staring at him. He didn't notice me at first, but when he finally turned around and saw me, his face went pale. He scrambled to stand up, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He knew I had him. I walked out of the apartment and immediately called the police. They arrived soon after. Daniel was arrested, and after they searched his apartment, they found more evidence of what he had been doing. He had been watching tenants for months, and no one had known. He even made crude recordings of some of them, some of which were found hidden behind more walls and floorboards. I couldn't believe it. It was like something out of a nightmare. It was only then that I realized how many red flags I had ignored: the odd behavior, the strange movements, the way he never slept. It was all there, right in front of me. I had to evict the other tenants who had been living in the building at the time, and I had to do a full security overhaul of the place. It took a long time to get things back to normal, but I never felt the same after that. I still check every apartment regularly, still make sure everything is locked and secure. But I'll never forget what I saw that night, the moment I realized that the person I'd been trusting had been spying on everyone. I had just started my second year of college when things started to feel like they were falling apart. My part-time job barely covered my rent, and I was living off instant noodles most nights. I was tired of the tiny, overpriced apartment I was in and figured it was time to look for something cheaper. But finding anything in my price range was nearly impossible. That's when I saw the ad. It was posted on a roommate finding website: room for rent in a quiet house. Free rent in exchange for help around the house. Message for details. I figured it was worth a shot. I was desperate. I messaged the guy, and within a couple of hours, he replied. His name was Carl. He said he had a spare room in his house and needed help with general upkeep, nothing too crazy, just helping with groceries, cleaning, maybe a little cooking. He sounded nice enough, and the best part was that he was offering free rent. I couldn't believe my luck. I didn't waste any time. I asked if I could come see the place. He said yes, and we arranged to meet the next day. The house was an older one, but it was clean and had a cozy feel to it. Carl was in his late 30s, I'd guess, maybe early 40s. He looked like an average guy, nothing off about him at all. He was friendly, welcoming, and seemed eager to show me around. He explained that he was a freelance writer and worked from home, which meant he was often around during the day. That suited me just fine, given I was mostly in class during the day and would be at work during the evenings. We talked for a while, and everything seemed perfect. He even showed me the room I would be staying in, which was a decent size and had a big window that let in a lot of natural light. I could already picture myself living there. The idea of not having to worry about rent was such a relief. Carl assured me that the arrangement would be temporary, but we could figure something out in the long term if I wanted to stay. It all felt too good to be true, but I was too tired to second guess it. A few days later, I moved in. Things went well at first. Carl was quiet but polite. He mostly kept to himself, and I didn't mind that at all. I had my own space, and I was getting used to the house. The only odd thing I noticed was that Carl never seemed to sleep. I thought maybe it was just a coincidence at first, but it started to get strange. Every time I came downstairs in the morning, I'd see him sitting at his desk, working away on his computer. Sometimes he'd be reading, sometimes writing, sometimes just staring at the screen. But no matter the time of day, I never saw him sleep. Not once. At night, he'd be in the living room watching TV or on his computer, and when I went to bed, he'd still be up. I figured maybe he was just a night owl or had some weird sleep schedule, but after a few weeks, it started to unsettle me. I was a college student, so I was used to late nights and busy schedules. But I had never encountered someone who just never seemed to sleep. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but something about it started to bug me. Then, one night, I noticed something else strange. I had been out with some friends and came home late, around 1 a.m. I had to get up early the next day for class, so I was ready to go to bed. As I reached the top of the stairs, I realized Carl's light was still on in the living room. I walked past the room and saw him sitting there, staring at the TV. He didn't acknowledge me as I passed, which was normal. He wasn't really the talkative type. But what was strange was that as I walked past, I noticed the door to my room was locked. I stopped in my tracks. I hadn't locked the door myself. I never locked it. I wasn't paranoid, but it struck me as odd. I checked the handle to make sure I wasn't mistaken, and sure enough, the lock was engaged. I tried to shake it off as nothing. Maybe I had locked it without thinking, but something about it didn't sit right. The next morning, I had to leave early for class. When I came back, I found that the door was locked again. I hadn't locked it when I left, and I certainly didn't have a reason to do so. It was the only door in the house that was locked. Carl's door was always open. I thought maybe Carl had done it as a weird precaution, but when I asked him, he just shrugged it off and said he had nothing to do with it. The days went by, and the locking continued. Every time I came home, my door would be locked. And it wasn't like he just locked it once or twice. It was every time, like clockwork. And it wasn't just a lock on my door. There were times when I'd come into the house and the windows in my room would be closed tight, even though I'd left them open. I decided to confront Carl. I don't know why it took me so long. Maybe I was too scared to know the truth, or maybe I was just so relieved by the free rent that I ignored it. But one evening, after a long day of classes, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on his door. "Carl?" I said, my voice shaking a little. "Can we talk?" He opened the door immediately. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a faint smell of coffee on his breath. "Yeah, what's up?" he asked, his voice a little too casual for the situation. "Why are you locking my door?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but I could feel my hands shaking. He froze for a second, then glanced away. "What do you mean?" "I haven't been locking your door." I shook my head. "Yes, you have." I've noticed it every single time. And it's not just the door. It's the windows too. You've been in my room, haven't you? He didn't answer right away. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then he sighed, his face falling into an expression that I couldn't quite read. I didn't want to tell you this, he began slowly. But I've been having some problems. Some paranoia, I guess you could say. I don't know. But I'm just trying to protect myself. From what? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a long time, like he was weighing whether or not to tell me. Then he spoke again. I've been hearing things, seeing things. I don't know. I feel like I need to keep you in here. Keep you close. I felt my heart stop for a moment, the words sinking in. I had thought it was a little strange, but I hadn't expected something like this. I think I need to leave, I said, my voice shaking. I'm not comfortable here anymore. Carl didn't argue. He just nodded, standing there in silence. I packed up my things that night. It was a rush. I barely even looked at my stuff, just shoving it all into bags, scared that if I didn't leave soon, something worse might happen. I never went back to that house. I never spoke to Carl again. I still don't know what was really going on with him, but the whole thing still haunts me. I don't know if he was paranoid or if there was something more to it, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never trusting a free rent offer again. It was meant to be a relaxing weekend. Just a break from the noise of daily life. A few of us had been planning it for a while, booking a cabin out in the woods, far enough from the city that we could just disconnect for a couple of days. No cell service, no distractions. Just the sounds of nature, a few games, and a lot of food. We rented the place online. The photos showed a nice little cabin surrounded by trees. It was rustic, but that's what we were looking for. The cabin was small but cozy, with an open living space and a big stone fireplace. The bedrooms were decent, with comfortable enough beds. It felt isolated, but that was part of the charm. The first night was perfect. We cooked dinner together, cracked open some drinks, and spent the evening laughing and playing board games. Everything was fine. But as the weekend wore on, a couple of odd things started happening. I didn't think much of it at first. A door that was left slightly ajar when we were sure we closed it. The sound of footsteps outside when there shouldn't have been anyone else around. But it was so easy to brush it off. We were in the middle of the woods. It was bound to be the wind or an animal, right? And the door? Well, it was an old cabin. The wood could shift, the lock could catch funny. It was easy to dismiss. The last night there, something happened that made me realize just how wrong things had been. It was already getting late. Everyone was in the living room, winding down, talking quietly, but I had a nagging feeling. I'd been meaning to check something. The closet in one of the bedrooms. It's hard to say why I thought about it. I guess I just remembered that the closet door had been slightly open when we first arrived. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I was alone in the cabin, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Something about it just didn't sit right with me. So, I stood up from the couch, excusing myself, and walked toward the back of the cabin where the bedrooms were. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of insects outside. The floor creaked under my feet as I approached the room. I reached for the door handle of the bedroom with the closet, and when I opened it, I froze. The closet wasn't empty like it should have been. There, sitting in the corner, was a sleeping bag. At first, I thought it might just be an extra one, but then I saw the trash scattered around it. Fast food wrappers, soda cans, empty snack bags. It wasn't just that someone had been in there, it was like someone had been living in the closet. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 days of staying there. Whoever it was had been eating and leaving their trash behind for longer than that. There were even crumbs on the floor. I could feel my stomach drop, but I didn't move. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. We'd been the only ones there. I thought back to the first night when I had checked the cabin, ensuring everything was locked and secure. There was no way someone had slipped in without us noticing. But here it was, a sleeping bag, trash, food wrappers. Evidence of someone who'd been staying in the cabin with us all along. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the mess. My heart pounded in my chest. My first thought was to turn around, go back to the others, but something stopped me. I felt like I had to keep looking. Maybe there was more, something else that would explain it. So, I stepped into the room and walked closer to the closet, my breath shallow. I could hear my own heartbeat, my steps too loud in the silence of the cabin. When I was right next to the sleeping bag, I stopped again, this time noticing something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A small, wrinkled piece of paper. It was tucked under the edge of the sleeping bag. I bent down to pick it up, careful not to disturb anything else. It was just a scrap, but there were words written on it, in a hurried, jagged script. "I'm sorry, but I can't leave now. I'm too scared." The words hit me like a punch. I stood frozen for a moment, the paper shaking in my hand. The air in the cabin felt suddenly heavier, as if I could feel someone watching me. I quickly stuffed the paper into my pocket, stepped away from the closet, and shut the door. My mind was spinning. Who had written that? Who had been in the cabin with us? I had to go back to the others. I didn't know what to say, but I needed to figure this out. I turned and walked out of the room, trying to keep my breathing steady. The hallway felt longer than it had before, as though the house itself was closing in on me. I went back to the living room, where the others were still talking, mostly unaware of my panic. I didn't know how to explain it to them. How do you tell people that someone's been hiding in the house with you, without you knowing? That thought alone sent another wave of coldness down my spine. I sat down on the couch and tried to act normal, like nothing had changed, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. I glanced at my friends, trying to gauge if any of them had noticed something off. But they were all relaxed, talking about what to do tomorrow when we finally leave. Nobody else seemed to have the same sense of dread creeping up their necks. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone anymore. That someone was watching us from the shadows, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the rustling of the trees outside the only noise breaking the silence. In the morning, we packed up quickly. No one else seemed to have the same unease I did, but I was eager to leave, to get out of that cabin. As we drove away, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing at the window, watching us go. But there was nothing. I don't know if anyone ever found out who had been living in that cabin. I didn't want to go back and check. The only thing I know is that I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, and the eerie sense that we weren't the only ones who had been there. I've been riding the same train every morning for years. It's part of my routine, like brushing my teeth or having coffee before work. I sit in the same spot every time, a corner seat by the window, the one that gives me a perfect view of the station and the tracks as we pull out. I didn't think much of it at first, but after a few weeks, I started to notice him. He always stood in the same spot on the platform. Every single morning, he'd be there, waiting, looking up at the train schedule or sometimes staring into the distance. He didn't look strange, or at least, he didn't at first. Just a regular man, maybe in his late 30s, wearing a jacket, a bit scruffy around the edges but nothing out of the ordinary. At first, I didn't think it meant anything. Maybe he took the same train too. But then it started to get odd. The next few mornings, I saw him on the same train, always in the same carriage, always standing by the door as if he was waiting for something. Every day, he'd board the train a few minutes before me. Same exact spot. Same look. The first few days, I told myself it was just coincidence. People take the same train. It's not unusual. But then I noticed something more unsettling. One morning, I caught a glimpse of him sitting in the same spot I always sat in, just across the aisle. He was looking out the window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of me. It felt like he was waiting for me to notice, like he was making sure I knew he was there. After a week of this, I couldn't stop myself from looking for him every morning. He became a fixture of my commute. At some point, I realized that he was always behind me when I got off the train. It was subtle, but I began to feel it. He was walking at the same pace, just a step behind me. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a coincidence. But the pattern kept repeating. Every day, the same train, the same spot. He would always board just before me, sit in the same place, and follow me off the train. I couldn't understand it, but I started getting nervous. I stopped looking over my shoulder, but I could feel his presence behind me. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, like someone was always watching me. One day, I decided to change things up. I wasn't going to take the usual route, the usual train, and sit in the usual spot. I needed to break the cycle, to see if this man was just a coincidence, or if he was somehow following me. So, I took a different train. The new train was a little less crowded, and it felt like a fresh start. I took a seat by the door, away from the window. I tried to act casual, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about him. Had I made the right choice? Was he really following me, or was I just paranoid? When I reached my stop, I got off the train and headed toward the exit. I breathed a little easier. No sign of him. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he wasn't stalking me after all. But then, as I walked toward the exit, I saw him. He was standing by the door, looking out, exactly where I had just stepped off. He was looking at me. He wasn't on the train I had just ridden. He wasn't even supposed to be on this route. I froze for a second. My heart pounded in my chest. How was he here? How was he always so close? He hadn't just gotten off the same train as me. He had gotten on a completely different one. And yet, there he was. He looked the same as always, calm, unbothered, but his eyes met mine, and I could tell he knew exactly who I was. He wasn't just a commuter anymore. He was something else. I couldn't explain it, but something in the way he looked at me made my blood run cold. I didn't want to stick around to find out. I turned and walked quickly toward the exit. My mind raced. How had he done that? Why was he following me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how carefully he'd been watching me. Every day, the same routine, the same pattern, until I'd finally broken it. But now, it seemed he was just waiting for me to change things up, waiting for me to slip up. I didn't look back as I exited the station, but the whole time I could feel his gaze on the back of my neck. I didn't go to work that day. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I kept going, I might be making the biggest mistake of my life. The next few days, I stayed home. I didn't take the train. I didn't go out. I couldn't bring myself to face the idea that he might be waiting for me again, like he always did. I couldn't explain what had happened or why he seemed to know exactly where I was going, what I was doing. All I knew was that the man I had seen on the train wasn't just some stranger. He was something more. Eventually, I tried to go back to my regular life, but it wasn't the same. The train, the route, everything, it all felt different. Every time I got on the train, I felt like I was being watched. Every corner I turned, every glance I made, I half expected to see him standing there, waiting. But every day, nothing happened. He didn't show up. I don't know what would have happened if I had kept taking that same train, or if he'd have shown up again. All I know is that I haven't seen him since that day. But I still wonder if he's out there somewhere, waiting for me to slip up again. Moving into a new neighborhood is always a mix of excitement and anxiety. My husband, Tom, and I had finally found a cozy house in a quiet suburb. The tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns seemed perfect for us. We were eager to settle in and make it our home. Our next-door neighbor was a man named Mr. Johnson. He appeared to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with graying hair and a reserved demeanor. Our first meeting was brief. He greeted us with a polite nod and a few words about the neighborhood. He mentioned he had lived there for several years and enjoyed the peace and quiet. Over the next few weeks, we had occasional interactions with Mr. Johnson. He was always courteous but kept to himself. He would wave from his porch or exchange a few words about the weather. There was nothing unusual about him, just a quiet man living his life. One evening, Tom and I were watching a documentary about unsolved crimes. As the program delved into various cases, a segment about a longtime fugitive came on. The man's face flashed on the screen, and I felt a jolt of recognition. The fugitive, wanted for serious crimes committed decades ago, bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Johnson. I couldn't shake the feeling. The similarities were too strong to ignore. I told Tom about my suspicion. He was skeptical at first, suggesting that many people can look alike. But the more we discussed it, the more convinced we became that our neighbor might be living under an assumed identity. We decided to do some research. We found old news articles and photos of the fugitive. The resemblance was uncanny. Details about the fugitive's age, physical description, and even certain habits matched what we knew about Mr. Johnson. Unsure of what to do, we debated our next steps. Confronting Mr. Johnson directly seemed dangerous. We didn't know what he might be capable of. After much deliberation, we decided to contact the authorities anonymously. We provided them with the information we had gathered and our suspicions. Days passed without any noticeable change. We went about our daily routines, though the tension was palpable. Then, one afternoon, unmarked cars arrived in the neighborhood. Law enforcement officers approached Mr. Johnson's house. From our window, we watched as they knocked on his door. He answered, appearing calm. After a brief conversation, they escorted him to one of the cars and drove away. News broke shortly after that Mr. Johnson was indeed the fugitive who had been on the run for years. He had been living under a false name, blending into communities to avoid capture. The revelation sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Neighbors expressed disbelief that the quiet man they had known was capable of such deception. Reflecting on the experience, Tom and I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that he was apprehended without incident, but also a lingering unease. It was unsettling to realize how little we knew about the people around us. The incident served as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes, danger lurks closer than we think. It started out like any other trip to the store. I needed to grab some groceries, so I decided to head to the local supermarket. I went in around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, thinking it would be a quick and uneventful stop. I wasn't in any rush, just picking up things I needed for the week. I noticed him right away, the man who was walking just a little too closely behind me in the aisles. It wasn't like he was standing directly behind me, but enough to make me uncomfortable. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It happens sometimes when you're alone in public spaces, right? You notice people, and sometimes your mind starts to play tricks on you. I moved through the aisles, picking up things off the shelves, and every time I turned around, he was still there, a few steps behind me. I went to the canned goods section, and he followed me there too. I tried to tell myself that maybe we were just going through the same aisles, that maybe we were on the same schedule. But the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. It kept twisting, like something wasn't quite right. I decided to test it. I walked quickly to the other end of the aisle, pretending to be distracted by something on the shelf. I glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, he was still there, walking at the same pace, following me. I tried not to panic. People often don't mean anything by it. Maybe he was just shopping. But why couldn't I shake the feeling that he was keeping just a little too close to me? I decided to make a turn into the frozen foods section, hoping I could get some space. As I walked around the corner, I glanced back again. This time, I caught him looking directly at me. His eyes locked on mine for just a second, and I quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the frozen meals in front of me. My pulse started to pick up. This wasn't right. I was starting to feel trapped. I went through the next few aisles, and every time I glanced over, he was still there. It was like he was attached to me. At one point, I turned into an aisle that was empty, thinking maybe I could lose him. I didn't see him for a moment, and I thought I had finally managed to escape. But as I reached for a box of cereal, I felt someone standing behind me again. I turned around quickly, and there he was, just standing there, looking at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. He didn't look dangerous, but there was something off about him. Something that made my stomach churn. His smile was a little too wide, his eyes a little too cold. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, looking at me, and it felt like an eternity. Then, finally, he spoke. "You don't look like you're from around here," he said. I didn't know how to respond, so I just mumbled something about living in the area. He nodded, like he was satisfied with my answer, and walked away. But he didn't leave the aisle. He just walked to the other end of it and turned back around. I didn't know what to do. My heart was beating so loudly, I felt like everyone in the store could hear it. I quickly grabbed what I needed and made my way to the front of the store. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of there before anything worse happened. I tried to keep my head down as I moved towards the exit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. I glanced around as I pushed through the sliding doors, and there he was, standing just inside, watching me. I froze for a second, my breath catching in my throat. I thought I had lost him. But no, he was still there. I quickly walked to my car, hoping to get away from him as fast as possible. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. I got to the car, unlocked the door, and just as I was about to slide into the driver's seat, I heard footsteps behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned, and there he was, standing at the edge of the parking lot, a few feet away from my car. He was just standing there, not moving, staring at me with that same unnerving smile. My breath caught in my throat. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice casual, like nothing was wrong. Like he wasn't standing there in a parking lot, blocking my way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something, anything, but I was frozen. I just stared at him for what felt like an eternity, trying to decide what to do next. He didn't make any move to approach me, but he wasn't leaving either. I didn't want to make any sudden moves, didn't want to do anything that might set him off. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get away. Then, finally, after what felt like forever, he turned and walked back toward the entrance of the store, never looking back. I don't know why he left. Maybe he lost interest, or maybe he saw someone else in the parking lot. I don't know. I didn't wait to find out. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My mind kept racing, my thoughts jumping from one thing to the next. I kept thinking about how close he had been, how he had followed me, how he hadn't left until I was almost trapped in that parking lot. I've thought about it every day since then. I can't shake the feeling that something was off about that whole situation. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just some weird guy, but I can't shake the thought that it could have been worse if I hadn't gotten away. I haven't been back to that store since. And I don't think I will anytime soon. Every time I drive by, I get that same feeling, like he's still out there, watching me. I was at the park last Tuesday afternoon, just trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace. It had been one of those weeks where everything felt off, work was stressing me out, family drama was brewing, and I just needed some fresh air. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over everything, and there weren't many people around, just a few joggers and a couple of families having picnics. I found a bench under a tree, opened my book, and tried to tune everything out. I should have known the moment I sat down that I wasn't going to get much peace. But at the time, I thought it was just me being overly anxious. I'd been there for about 20 minutes when I heard footsteps approaching. I didn't look up right away, assuming it was just someone walking by. But the footsteps stopped. "Hey," the man said, his voice almost too calm. It wasn't a loud greeting, just the kind of voice that made you feel like you didn't have a choice but to acknowledge it. I glanced up. He was standing about a foot away from the bench, looking at me with an almost unsettling intensity. Mid-30s, maybe a little older, with dark hair and a face that looked familiar but not in any specific way. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but there was something about him that felt off. Like he didn't belong in this peaceful scene. "Do you come here often?" he asked. It's a typical question, right? One of those small talk openers. I nodded, deciding to be polite. "Yeah, it's nice here. Just needed some quiet today." "Quiet's good, yeah," he said, sitting down on the other end of the bench without asking. He wasn't close, but still, he was uncomfortably near. I figured I'd just finish my chapter and leave, but something in my gut told me to be cautious. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I could feel a shift in the air. He stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "You like to read?" "Yeah, I do," I answered, trying to remain neutral, hoping he would take the hint that I was just here to enjoy the day alone. He leaned forward slightly, and that's when I started getting that prickling feeling along my skin. He wasn't just making small talk anymore, it felt like he was trying to dig deeper. "What's your favorite kind of book?" he asked, his voice low, almost too curious. I like a lot of different kinds, I said, stiffening. Just whatever catches my attention. He nodded, then smiled a little, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something unsettling about it, something that made my stomach twist. I tried to ignore the feeling, but it was getting harder. Are you married? He asked, his voice softer now, like it was an innocent follow-up. I raised an eyebrow, confused. No, I said, unsure why he was asking such personal questions. But the tone of his voice was changing, almost like he was trying to dig into my life, piece by piece. Do you live around here? He continued. It wasn't a question anymore. It was more like he was gathering information, like he needed it for some unknown reason. At this point, I knew something was wrong. My hands were starting to sweat, and my heart rate had picked up. This wasn't normal. Most people don't ask these kinds of questions out of nowhere. And I didn't know if it was just the vibe he gave off or the way he was staring at me, but it made me feel small. Like I was trapped in this conversation without a way to escape. I tried to push myself off the bench, clutching my book like it could offer some kind of protection. I'm sorry, I need to go. But before I could get to my feet, he stood up too, stepping in front of me. You're leaving already? His voice had dropped, becoming sharper. I was just trying to talk. I didn't answer, just took a step back. My body was telling me to move quickly, to get away from him, but my legs felt frozen. Wait, he said, his tone suddenly more forceful, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of frustration in his eyes. You can't just sit here and waste my time and then walk away. I froze. What did he mean, waste his time? I didn't owe him anything. I barely even knew him. I'm sorry, I said, now trying to move around him, trying to be polite but firm. I don't know you. I'm just trying to enjoy my day. You owe me a conversation, he said, stepping closer. You don't get to walk away after wasting my time. I was now completely unnerved. I could feel my body reacting before I even had a chance to process it. My eyes darted around the park, looking for anyone, any kind of help, but the place was empty. The joggers had passed, and the families had packed up and left. It was just the two of us. I stood taller, trying to make myself seem less vulnerable. I don't owe you anything, I said firmly, stepping back again. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to let him see it. Leave me alone. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might get angry. But instead, he just stood there, staring at me. The silence between us stretched, and I could feel the tension building, like he was trying to decide what to do next. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he just shook his head and mumbled something under his breath. Fine. But don't think you can just do that. People don't just get to ignore me. I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and walked quickly in the opposite direction, my heart racing in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me for a few moments, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was no longer following. It felt like a lifetime until I reached my car and locked the doors. I drove home with my hands still trembling on the steering wheel, my mind replaying the entire encounter over and over. What had just happened? Why did it feel so wrong? Why did it feel like he was trying to corner me into something I didn't understand? It was just a conversation, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like I was the target of something much darker, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided a very dangerous situation. I haven't gone back to that park since. And every time I see someone approach me in public now, I can't help but feel that same unease, that same fear. I don't think he was just some random person looking for company. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm not willing to find out. If anything, I learned to trust my instincts more, because I know now that sometimes people don't need to say much to make you feel trapped. I was walking home from my friend's house late in the evening. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was low, and I knew I needed to get back before it got too late. I usually take the main roads, but that day, I decided to cut through the alley behind the hardware store. It saved about 10 minutes, and I'd walked through there plenty of times before without any problems. The alley wasn't long. You could see straight through to the other side where it opened back onto the street. There were a few dumpsters and some old wooden pallets leaning against the walls, but it was mostly empty. I didn't feel nervous at first. I was just focused on getting home. I was about halfway down when I heard footsteps behind me. They were close enough that I knew they weren't just someone passing through. I glanced back and saw two men walking toward me. They weren't running, but their pace was quick, like they were trying to catch up. One of them was wearing a dirty gray hoodie, and the other had on a leather jacket that looked way too heavy for the weather. They didn't look like anyone I'd seen around before. "Hey, wait up," the guy in the hoodie called out. I stopped but kept a little distance between us. I thought maybe they were going to ask for directions or something. When they got closer, the guy in the hoodie smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. "Don't you remember us?" he said. "We've met before." I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Sure we have," the guy in the leather jacket said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking a lot. "You were with your dad at that car shop last month, right? You had the blue jacket on." I hadn't been to any car shop recently, and I didn't even own a blue jacket. I told them they must have me confused with someone else, but they didn't back off. "Nah, it was definitely you," the guy in the hoodie insisted. He stepped closer, cutting off the path ahead of me. "You're just playing dumb." I started to feel uneasy. My heart was beating faster, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. I need to get home." The guy in the leather jacket moved behind me, blocking the way I'd come. I was stuck between them. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" he asked. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, just talk," the hoodie guy said. "What's the rush?" I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out and make it obvious I was calling for help. I felt trapped, and the alley suddenly seemed a lot longer than it had a minute ago. The guy in the hoodie stepped even closer, invading my space. "You live around here, right? We've seen you before. You're always walking this way." That made my stomach drop. If they really had been watching me, I hadn't noticed. I told them again they had the wrong person, but my voice was shaking now. They knew I was scared. "Relax," the leather jacket guy said. "We're just being friendly. You don't have to act all stuck up." I took a step back, but it didn't help. The hoodie guy matched my movement, keeping the distance the same. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. "You think you're too good to talk to us?" he asked, his tone sharper. I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again. The leather jacket guy pushed off the wall and started closing the gap behind me. I was running out of space, and they both knew it. "Let me go," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked. "Go where?" the hoodie guy said, almost laughing. "We're not done yet." My hand was in my pocket now, gripping my phone, but I was too scared to pull it out. I felt like if I made one wrong move, things would get worse. "Someone's going to come through here," I said, hoping to bluff them. This is a busy street. No one's coming, the leather jacket guy said. Why do you think we picked this spot? That's when I panicked. I bolted to the side, aiming for the small gap between the hoodie guy and the wall. He grabbed for me, but I twisted away and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back, but I could hear them shouting and their footsteps pounding behind me. The other end of the alley felt like it was miles away. My chest was burning, and my legs felt like they might give out, but I didn't stop. I burst out onto the street, nearly colliding with a man walking his dog. I shouted for help, barely able to get the words out. The two guys stopped at the edge of the alley. They didn't come any further, probably because the street was busy enough that people would notice. They just stood there, staring at me, before turning and walking back the way they'd come. The man with the dog called the police for me. I was shaking so much I could barely explain what had happened. When the officers arrived, they took my statement and walked me home, but they didn't find the two men. They told me to avoid the alley from now on and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I don't think I ever will again. Even now, every time I see someone walking toward me, I feel a spike of fear, wondering if it's them. Wondering if they'll remember me. It started as just another drive home from work. The kind of uneventful commute you don't even think about. I was merging onto the highway when a black SUV cut me off. I hit the brakes hard, my seatbelt digging into my chest, and I leaned on the horn without even thinking about it. I wasn't angry, really, just startled. The driver threw up a hand, like they were waving me off, and I thought that was the end of it. A couple of miles later, I noticed the SUV again. They were hanging in my blind spot, then speeding up to stay even with me. I glanced over, trying to get a look at them, but the windows were tinted too dark to see anything. I didn't think much of it until they swerved closer, like they were trying to nudge into my lane. I moved over into the right lane just to get away from them, but they followed, sticking right behind me this time. At that point, I started to feel uneasy. I checked the time, 6:30 p.m., and figured maybe they were just in a hurry to get somewhere, but my stomach was tight. I decided to ignore them and keep driving. If they were trying to mess with me, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. But then they started following me off the highway. My exit wasn't busy, just a small turnoff that led into a residential area. I didn't think it was strange until I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them right there, just a car length behind me. There were no other cars around, no reason for them to be on my tail like that. I made a left at the light, and so did they. I made a right at the next street, and they stayed with me. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe they lived in the same direction. But then I took another left, this time into a random neighborhood I didn't even know, and they followed. I drove in circles for a while, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. But no matter how many turns I made, they were there, close enough for me to see their headlights in my mirror. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, so did they. I decided to test it. At the next intersection, I pulled into a gas station and parked right in front of the convenience store, where it was bright and busy. The SUV passed by without stopping, and I let out a shaky breath, laughing at myself for getting so worked up. But then, not even 2 minutes later, they circled back and pulled into the lot, parking just a few spaces away. I couldn't see who was inside. The windows were still too dark. I stared at the car, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my lap, and I thought about calling someone, but I didn't even know what to say. "Hey, I think someone's following me," sounded ridiculous. Instead, I got out and went into the store, my keys clutched tight in my hand. I lingered by the counter, pretending to browse the candy display while I kept an eye on the door. The SUV stayed parked outside. Nobody got out. When I finally worked up the nerve to leave, I took a long route back to my car, walking through the rows of pumps to avoid getting too close to the SUV. I climbed in and locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I decided to head toward the main road, where it was busier. If they followed me again, at least there'd be witnesses. Sure enough, as soon as I pulled out, the SUV did too. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I merged into traffic, trying to act like I didn't notice them. That's when they started speeding up. I was doing 40 in a 35, and they were getting closer, their headlights bright in my rearview mirror. I pressed the gas pedal harder, but they matched my speed, staying just a few feet behind me. I switched lanes, hoping they'd pass, but instead, they swerved into the same lane and honked. It felt like my chest was caving in. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what I'd done to make them so angry. Was it the horn? Was it because I cut them off earlier? I couldn't remember doing anything wrong. I spotted a police station up ahead and turned into the parking lot without thinking. The SUV slowed down but didn't follow me in. They rolled past, and I caught a glimpse of the driver's silhouette, a large figure, maybe a man, but I couldn't be sure. I stayed in the lot for a while, waiting for my nerves to settle. When I finally felt calm enough to leave, I didn't see the SUV anywhere. I decided to take a longer route home, just to be safe. I stuck to busy streets and well-lit areas, glancing in my mirrors every few seconds. I thought I'd lost them. I really did. But when I turned onto my street, there they were, parked a few houses down from mine. My stomach dropped. I drove past my house, not wanting them to know where I lived. Instead, I went around the block and parked in someone else's driveway, crouching low in my seat. The SUV idled for a minute before pulling away. I waited until I couldn't see their taillights anymore, then backed out and drove straight to a friend's house. I didn't go home that night. I didn't even tell my friend what happened. I just made up some excuse about needing company and stayed on their couch, staring at the ceiling until morning. The next day, I filed a report with the police. They took my statement but said there wasn't much they could do without a license plate or a clearer description of the driver. I started noticing SUVs everywhere after that, at intersections, in parking lots, parked along my route to work. Each time, my stomach would clench, and I have to remind myself that it probably wasn't them. I never saw the black SUV again after that, but I still think about it every time I get in my car. Every time I glance in the mirror and see headlights too close behind me. I still wonder who they were, what they wanted, and why they stopped following me when they did. I don't know if I'll ever get those answers. It's taken me a long time to finally put this down, and even now, I'm not sure I can make sense of it. It feels strange to even talk about. I never thought something like this could happen, but it did, and I'm still not sure how to feel about it. It all started a few months ago when a new guy started working at the office. His name was Mark. I didn't think much of him at first, just another guy in the cubicles, trying to settle in. I noticed he seemed to be friendly, always asking questions, a little too eager to help. He would chat with me more than with anyone else, asking about my day, asking if I wanted coffee, offering to run small errands for me. He was nice enough, I guess, but I started feeling uncomfortable after a while. His attention was a little too much, too often. But I brushed it off, figuring I was just being paranoid. Then came the first strange thing. One day, I came into the office, and there was a small plant on my desk. Not just any plant either, a little succulent, in a ceramic pot with a handwritten note that said, "I thought this would make your day brighter." I didn't recognize the handwriting, and there was no name. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to sound ungrateful, but it felt odd, especially coming from someone I barely knew. Still, I thought maybe it was just a nice gesture. Maybe someone was just being friendly. Maybe I was overthinking it. The next day, another gift. A coffee mug. It wasn't the same as the plant at this time. The mug was just a generic one, but it had my favorite color on it. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too specific. But again, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I put the mug in my cabinet and tried to forget about it. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Little notes, small gifts, always things that felt a little too personal. A new set of pens with my initials on them. A box of chocolates with a message that said, "For your sweet smile." It was always just the right amount of thoughtfulness to seem like a nice gesture, but at the same time, it always felt off. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate kindness, I did, but the more these gifts piled up, the more I felt trapped. I never knew how to respond, or even if I should. I started to notice Mark more. He'd be standing a little too close when he talked to me. He'd give me this odd, almost vacant smile whenever I tried to step away from him. There was something about his eyes that made me feel uneasy. But he was always polite, always professional, so I tried not to make a big deal out of it. After all, I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. Then came the first incident that really made me uncomfortable. One evening, I was leaving work a little later than usual, and as I was walking to my car, I saw Mark standing in the parking lot. I figured maybe he was just waiting for someone else or having a smoke, but then I realized he was looking directly at me. Not just glancing over, but really watching. It was unnerving. When I waved and said goodbye, he didn't wave back. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on me. I brushed it off as weird timing. Maybe he was waiting for his ride, maybe he hadn't seen me leave. But the next day, when I got to work, there was another note on my desk. "I saw you leaving last night. You looked like you needed some fresh air." That was when my stomach dropped. How could he have known that unless he was watching me? I tried to laugh it off, but I couldn't. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just overreacting. But something was wrong. I didn't want to confront him, didn't want to make it awkward or escalate things, so I stayed quiet. But the weirdness continued. A few days later, when I was out running errands after work, I ran into him at a coffee shop. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, so the coincidence felt off. He smiled at me, a little too eagerly. "I didn't know you came here," he said. "I love this place." I felt my stomach twist. "Yeah, it's a nice spot," I said, forcing a smile. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to be polite, but my mind was racing. Why was he here? How did he know this was where I liked to go? Things only escalated from there. Over the next couple of weeks, I started noticing him showing up in places I frequented, cafes, stores, even the gym. He never said anything when I saw him. He would just smile, wave, and act like it was the most normal thing in the world. But I was starting to get scared. It wasn't just the gifts anymore. It wasn't just the notes. It was the fact that he seemed to be following me. I tried to avoid him, taking different routes home, changing up my routine. But it didn't seem to matter. No matter where I went, Mark always seemed to be there. At first, it was easy enough to brush off as coincidence, but then I started noticing things I couldn't ignore. I came into work one morning to find a picture of myself sitting on my desk. It was a photo of me walking into a store the day before. He had taken it from a distance, but it was definitely me. There was a note attached. I like the way you dress. You always look so nice. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I could trust anyone anymore, not even the people I worked with. I'd spent weeks trying to figure out how to handle it, but this was too much. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I went to my manager and told her everything. I showed her the pictures, the notes, the gifts. She was surprised, shocked even. She had no idea anything was going on. But I knew something had to be done. We decided to report it to HR, who in turn contacted the security team and said they would look into it. Mark was called into the office for a meeting the next day. And after that, he was never seen again. No one ever said what happened. There was no explanation, no word about whether he was let go or if there were any consequences. All I know is that he was gone, and the gifts stopped. The notes stopped. But I still feel uneasy sometimes. I still wonder if he's out there, watching me. It's hard to shake that feeling. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't know why he chose me. But I know I never want to go through something like that again. I don't think anyone should ever have to. It's hard for me to even think about what happened. I still get flashes of that weekend, the way everything spiraled out of control so quickly. The woods were supposed to be a getaway, a way to unwind from the daily grind. I thought we were going to have a good time, just the 5 of us. But none of us expected the nightmare that followed. It started on the 2nd day of our camping trip. We had set up camp in a secluded area, deep in the forest, a place that wasn't too far from the nearest trail, but far enough that we felt like we had some privacy. The kind of spot where you can hear only the wind and the occasional rustle of wildlife. No cell service, no distractions. We were there to get away, to relax. There was me, my friend Matt, his girlfriend Claire, and 2 others, Jake and Maria. Everyone was in a good mood that morning. We had spent the previous day hiking around, exploring, and just enjoying the peace of being out in nature. We even made a small fire, roasted some marshmallows, and had a few beers. It was nice. But things took a turn when we decided to venture into the woods to gather some wild mushrooms. Matt had done it before, and we all figured it would be a good way to add something fresh to our dinner. Claire wasn't too sure about it, but she went along with it, not wanting to be the odd one out. We wandered for maybe half an hour before Matt found some mushrooms he said were safe. He seemed pretty confident, even a little too confident. We weren't experts, but he swore by it. So we picked a decent amount, enough to cook with. By the time we returned to camp, the sun was beginning to set, and we were all hungry. We cooked up what we gathered with the rest of the food we brought. It wasn't long after we ate that things started to go south. At first, it was subtle. Claire mentioned feeling a little off, but she chalked it up to the hike. Jake seemed a little more tired than usual, but we figured it was from the heat. Matt was fine, or so he claimed. But then, about an hour later, Maria suddenly doubled over, clutching her stomach. Her face went pale, and her breathing started to come in sharp gasps. We all rushed her, asking if she was okay, but she could barely answer. She was sweating, her body stiff and trembling. I couldn't tell what was going on. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't allergic to anything, at least as far as we knew. But she kept muttering that she felt wrong. That something was wrong inside her. At first, we thought it might have been a stomach bug, or maybe she ate something that didn't sit right with her. But as time went on, her condition worsened. She wasn't just nauseous, she was shaking uncontrollably. Her skin started to flush red, and her eyes became unfocused. By then, Claire was panicking, trying to get a signal on her phone to call for help, but there was nothing. No bars. We were stuck. We tried to make her comfortable, but nothing helped. We gave her water, hoping it would settle her stomach, but it just made things worse. She started vomiting, and then she collapsed. That was when we realized just how serious it was. It felt like the air around us had thickened, the reality of the situation sinking in. She wasn't getting better. She was getting worse. I remember trying to calm Claire down, telling her everything would be fine, but I didn't know what to do either. We were in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town. No phone signal, no way to get help. It was like a nightmare that had become real. We knew we had to do something. The only thing we could think of was to get help, but we had no idea who to trust. Matt insisted it was the mushrooms. He started muttering about how some of them could be poisonous if you weren't careful. He had eaten them, too, but he didn't seem as bad. Still, his face was pale, and he looked nauseous. Claire wanted to leave and try to find help, but we didn't know the way. And we couldn't just leave Maria like this. We were stuck. We had a long conversation, trying to figure out who could leave and who should stay behind with Maria. But every time we talked about it, the situation seemed more and more dire. No one wanted to leave her. No one wanted to risk it. But we also couldn't just stay there and do nothing. We were all scared. Everyone was scared. Matt eventually volunteered. He said he could handle it, that he was the only one who knew the way back to the trail. The rest of us were in no condition to hike out, Maria was in no shape to move, and Jake and Claire were both starting to show signs of nausea too. I wasn't feeling great myself, but I was functional. Barely. I remember Matt leaving with a small pack of supplies. He said he would be back as quickly as he could, but none of us believed him. We all knew the forest was vast, and the nearest town was over 20 miles away. Even if he made it to the trail, it would take hours for him to get help, and that was if he didn't get lost or collapse along the way. Hours passed. We sat by the fire, the sounds of the woods creeping in around us, the stillness broken only by Maria's labored breathing. The night seemed to stretch on forever. Every time the wind rustled the trees, we thought it might be Matt coming back. But it wasn't. It never was. By the time morning came, we were all on edge. Maria was still out of it, barely conscious. The rest of us were exhausted, too sick to move properly. I checked her pulse and tried to keep her warm, but she was slipping. It was like she wasn't even there anymore, her body limp and unresponsive. I don't know how long we would have lasted if Matt hadn't come back. When he did, he was almost unrecognizable. His face was drawn, his eyes wild, and his movements were shaky. He said he'd found a cabin on the edge of the forest and managed to get to a phone. Help was on the way. But even then, I could tell something was off. He looked pale, his hands trembling. The rescue team arrived a few hours later. They took Maria and the rest of us back to the town. By then, we were all feeling better, though none of us were sure if we could trust what had happened. Maria had to stay in the hospital for a few days to recover, but she made it. We never did figure out exactly what happened, what had caused the poisoning, or if it was the mushrooms at all. We never went back to that place. I still don't know what Matt saw or did out there, but I don't want to know. Whatever happened, it was close. Too close. I still can't shake the feeling. The cold, wet air. The sound of my own breath mixed with the pounding rain. And that feeling of someone watching, someone just behind me, every step of the way. It started like any other run. I was out on my usual route, the kind of run I do when I need to clear my head. The rain had been coming down hard all day, and I wasn't about to let that stop me. I had my head up, my shoes splashing through the puddles, and the rhythmic sound of my footsteps in my ears. The world felt distant, the streets quieter than usual, the kind of night where everything seems muffled by the storm. It wasn't until I was about halfway through that I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just the noise of the rain, maybe some stray footsteps from someone else running nearby. But then I realized. The footsteps were too close, too in sync with mine. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just my imagination, but it didn't stop. Every time I picked up the pace, the footsteps behind me quickened. Every time I slowed down, they slowed too. I glanced over my shoulder once, quickly, just to see if anyone was there. Nothing. Just the rain, the street lights reflecting off the wet pavement. But when I turned my head back, I could hear it again, the footsteps, still right behind me. I could feel my heart starting to race, the anxiety creeping up in my chest. Who would be out here in this weather, running so close? I sped up, thinking maybe I was just paranoid, but they kept matching my pace. The sound of those steps, heavy, deliberate, was starting to make my skin crawl. I had to stop. I needed to see who it was, to confront them. If someone was behind me, they were clearly following me, and I wasn't about to be caught unaware. I turned sharply to the side, slipping slightly on the wet pavement as I came to a stop, but still keeping my eyes on the street behind me. My breath was coming out in clouds, but I couldn't stop looking, couldn't stop listening. For a moment, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no movement. The rain kept falling, louder now, the only sound in the empty street. Then I heard it again. The footsteps. But this time, they were closer. I tensed, standing there in the rain, just waiting. My nerves were shot, every muscle in my body screaming for me to either run or confront whoever it was. I chose to turn around and face whatever was coming. And there he was. A man, just a few feet away, standing in the rain, looking at me with this intense, unsettling stare. I couldn't see much of his face. He had a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, the fabric soaked through. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, but I could tell his posture was stiff, almost like he was waiting for something. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "You following me?" I asked, my voice shaky but firm. The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, staring at me. I felt the tension between us building, something in the air thickening with the promise of something bad. My pulse was racing, and I could feel my legs starting to shake. But I wasn't about to let him see that. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You're in my way." I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't know if he was talking about the street or something else, but his tone was all wrong. There was no reason for him to be this close, this intense. I didn't know if he was threatening me or just crazy, but I knew I had to get out of there. I took a step back, trying to put some space between us. "I'm just running. I don't want any trouble," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, though inside, I was panicking. The man didn't move. He just stood there, still staring at me. And then, before I could even think, he took a step forward. It was sudden, fast, and without warning. I froze, my feet rooted to the wet pavement. "What do you want?" I demanded, louder now, more desperate. I had to keep control. I had to. I wasn't about to get caught in this situation. But as I stepped back again, he took another step closer, closing the distance between us. The man's eyes narrowed. "I'm not done with you," he said, each word dripping with something dark, something threatening. I turned and ran. I didn't think about it, didn't hesitate for a second. I bolted down the street, heart pounding in my chest, every step faster than the last. The sound of the rain in my ears, the sloshing of my shoes in the puddles, none of it mattered. I couldn't hear anything but my own frantic breath and those footsteps, now echoing in time with mine. He was still behind me. I could hear him gaining on me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I could feel his presence, like he was inches away, waiting for the right moment to grab me. The rain was coming down harder now, a blur of water, and I could barely see. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Now I had no idea what this man wanted or how far he was willing to go. I turned down a side street, hoping to lose him, hoping he would just give up and turn away. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were right there. Closer now. I didn't know what he would do when he caught me. I didn't want to find out. I spotted a row of houses up ahead, the lights from the windows offering a glimmer of safety. I pushed myself harder, pumping my legs, not daring to slow down. I was almost there. I was almost safe. Then, just as I reached the sidewalk near the houses, the footsteps stopped. The sound of them, the heavy, deliberate steps, just cut off. For a second, I thought maybe he had given up. I didn't want to risk looking back, but something told me that it was too quiet now. Too still. I slowed my pace, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, the anxiety still crawling under my skin, the feeling of being hunted lingering in the air. And just as I was about to turn the corner, I heard the voice again. Low. Menacing. You can't run forever. I didn't stop running until I was inside the first house I found, knocking frantically on the door, not even caring if I looked crazy. When the door opened, I practically collapsed, still shaking, still drenched from the rain. The woman who answered looked at me in confusion, but when I explained what had happened, she let me in without a word. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the night, but I did. I never saw the man again. But I can't stop thinking about him, about the way he followed me, about the way he spoke, like it wasn't just about running anymore. I don't know if he was just trying to scare me or if he had something worse planned. But the whole night feels like a blur, just the sound of rain and footsteps, and his voice. I haven't gone for a run since. It was a late Friday night, around 2 a.m. I had just finished a long shift at work and was driving home, the streets empty and quiet, only the hum of my car and the occasional flicker of streetlights breaking the silence. I'd taken the usual route, the one that was closest to my place, the one I had taken a million times before. I was tired, probably more tired than I should have been, but I was looking forward to getting home and going to bed. The next few minutes are still a blur. I remember seeing the flashing lights in my rearview mirror and initially thinking it was just another car behind me, but the lights kept getting closer. I didn't think anything of it at first, maybe they were just going around me. But then, I noticed the car had no other lights on except for the flashing red and blue ones. It was weird, but it didn't register as alarming yet. I didn't panic. I just pulled over to the side of the road. The car that stopped behind me was unmarked. No police insignia or anything identifying it as an official vehicle. But the lights were enough to make me believe it was a cop, even though I could tell something wasn't quite right. The person who got out of the car was wearing a dark uniform, and their headlights illuminated their face just enough for me to make out the white shirt collar underneath. but he was wearing no badge. It felt strange, but I assumed it was some off-duty officer or maybe a state trooper. He approached my window and I rolled it down, trying to stay calm. I wasn't nervous at first. I'd been pulled over before, so this felt like any other traffic stop, even though I couldn't shake the odd feeling in my stomach. "Do you know why I stopped you?" he asked in a deep voice, leaning toward my window. I could smell something faint on his breath, but it wasn't alcohol, more like a faint musk of cologne or maybe a cigarette. I shook my head. I had no idea. "You were speeding," he said. "License and registration." I nodded and reached for my purse. I wasn't thinking much about it, just the usual stuff you do when you're stopped by a cop. I fumbled a little as I grabbed my license and my insurance card, handing them over to him. He didn't say anything for a moment as he looked at them. That's when the unease started creeping in. His hands were unusually rough, and when he glanced at my license, his eyes lingered on it a little too long. "I'm going to need you to step out of the car," he said, his voice suddenly sharper. I didn't question it. Maybe he just wanted to talk to me on the side of the road, I thought. It was late, and maybe he wanted to make sure I wasn't intoxicated or something. Still, something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. But I was tired, and I didn't want to argue. I reached for the handle and opened the door. I had barely stepped out of the car when I felt a hand on my arm. It wasn't gentle, it was firm, almost rough, and it sent a shock of adrenaline straight through me. I stopped immediately, my heart racing. "You need to step away from the vehicle," he said, his tone changing again, colder. There was a shift in his body language, and for the first time, I felt truly alarmed. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice shaking now. "I mean, why am I getting out of the car?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept holding my arm, and the grip tightened. My mind was racing, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. This was not right. No officer had ever made me step out of my car like this, especially in the middle of nowhere. "I'm just following procedure," he said, though his words sounded rehearsed, like he was trying to make it sound official. But something in his eyes made my stomach churn. It wasn't the look of a cop, it was the look of someone who had an agenda. His pupils were too wide. His breathing was too slow, too controlled. "I need to call someone," I said, trying to stay calm but my voice trembling now. I reached for my phone, but before I could unlock it, his grip on my arm tightened, and he pulled me toward his car. "No, you don't need to do that," he said in a low, menacing tone. "Just come with me, and it'll be fine." I tried to pull away, but he was stronger than I expected. His hold was firm, and I couldn't break free. Panic surged in me, and every instinct told me to run. But before I could make any kind of move, I felt a sharp tug on my arm, and then, like a switch had flipped, I realized he wasn't planning to let me go. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was a trap. He pushed me toward his car, and that's when the full realization hit me. The man wasn't a cop. He wasn't anything like one. He didn't have a badge, he didn't have a radio, and his car wasn't an official police vehicle. It looked like a plain black sedan, just another random car in the night. I kicked and screamed, finally managing to pull my arm free. I didn't know what else to do. I was terrified. The car behind him was parked too far to reach for help, and the road was completely empty. No one would hear me. My mind raced, and everything seemed to slow down, but in that moment, I knew I had to get away. I took a deep breath, ignored the pounding of my heart in my ears, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about anything except getting to safety. I sprinted as fast as I could, my feet hitting the asphalt harder with each step. The sound of his voice calling after me was distant now, but I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't stop running until I found a well-lit gas station about a mile up the road. I ran inside, gasping for breath, and told the clerk what had happened. He immediately called the police. When they arrived, they took my statement, and I found out that there had been reports of people being targeted by fake officers in that area for weeks. I couldn't believe it. They never found the man. The car was gone by the time the police got to the scene, and the only thing they could do was take my report. But I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, that cold look in his gaze, and the way he gripped my arm. I still get chills thinking about it. I haven't driven at night alone since that incident. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I'm just thankful that I got away. It still haunts me, though. The fact that I was so close to something terrible happening, and I didn't even see it coming.